The Self-Employment Survival Guide. Proven Strategies to Succeed as Your Own Boss by Jeanne Yocum. Foreword by Riva Lasonsky. Narrated by Susie Althans. Foreword. For many of you, entering the self-employment zone for the first time can feel like both the exhilarating culmination of a dream come true and the realization of your scariest nightmare. Whether you have owned a business before, come to self-employment with years of work experience, or are just starting out in the workforce, you are in for a roller coaster ride. The world of business ownership is filled with surprises, both good and bad, and the key to survival is how well you negotiate those ups, downs, and hairpin curves. None of this is meant to scare you off. I just want you to be prepared. I started my own business, GrowBiz Media and SmallBizDaily.com, with 2 partners, a little more than 9 years ago, after working for more than 2 decades at Entrepreneur Magazine and growing up in a small business family. My father, both grandfathers, and my uncles were all either self-employed or owners of small businesses. And as much as I learned living and covering the world of small business and entrepreneurship for all those years, I still made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, and followed bad advice. But there were upsides too, strangers who became clients, who became friends. It may help to think of self-employment as a journey. And as with any excursion, you need a goal, a plan, and a guidebook before you head out. First, no one can determine your goal but you. Some come to self-employment because they're between jobs and need to pay the rent. Others have worked for years for someone else and reached what used to be referred to as retirement age, but they have too many years left to retire, or they need to supplement their income. Still others choose self-employment because they want the flexibility to choose when and where to work, or they hate their jobs. Some are doing something they're passionate about, and they want to share and monetize that passion. Then there are those who plan to make self-employment the first step of a longer, entrepreneurial journey, starting small and growing large. Whatever your motivation, the choices you make, the paths in the road you choose, will be driven by your goals. So make sure you are clear about where you want your self-employment journey to lead. Once you know what you want, you need to figure out how you're going to get there. In other words, you need a plan. I'm a big proponent of creating business plans, despite many today who will tell you they're not necessary. Even if no one but you will ever see your business plan, the very act of creating one will help you think about what you're doing, where you're heading, and how you're going to get there. If you've never run a business before, writing a business plan will prompt you to think about things you might not have thought of otherwise. It will force you to think about pricing, marketing, sales, and competitors and come up with a game plan of how you will tackle those areas. If the idea of writing a business plan, even if just for yourself, still seems overwhelming, look into the lean business plan concept. Tim Berry and Sabrina Parsons have written a lot about the subject, so check out their insights at bplans.com. Now is a good time to explore self-employment. There are plenty of places to get help. Go to your local SCORE office or nearest Small Business Development Center for free advice. In addition, there are a lot of marketplaces that didn't exist 2 decades ago that made it a lot easier to find work, get paid, and even, in some cases, get benefits. These marketplaces are also a great resource for you to find any help you might need. All small business owners must wear many hats, but the self-employed are particularly burdened by having numerous responsibilities while running their companies, as small as they might be. You cannot possibly know everything you need to know, or do everything that needs to get done, so consider outsourcing certain tasks to those with more experience. Even though my company has 3 employees, we are a virtual business. That means I work alone. While many of you may welcome that solitude, for me the isolation was one of the things that caught me by surprise. There are ways to get around that. Schedule meetings, meet old colleagues, join a business organization, and the like. I talk to myself a lot. Jeanne Yocum addresses this concern in Part 4, which leads to the last must-have as you set forth on this journey, a guidebook. You are, more than likely, entering uncharted territory, at least for you. You wouldn't set out on a journey without a map, in the old days, or GPS to help guide your path. That's what Yocum set out to provide in the Self-Employment Survival Guide. Think of her as your Sherpa, the person who's there to make your journey easier. This book tells you what to expect, identifies the potential pitfalls, and helps keep you on the right path. As I said above, while nothing can completely prepare you for self-employment, this book makes you aware of the possibilities of what may happen and how you can plan ahead to avoid the bad and embrace the good. Whether you're starting on this journey to self-employment driven by passion or profit doesn't matter. What's important is that even though you're self-employed, you are not alone. Yocum is in your corner, and this book will help you safely navigate your journey. Riva Lesonsky, small business expert and founder of smallbizdaily.com. Introduction. An end and a beginning. Each year when Labor Day rolls around, I celebrate with extra fervor because it was on Labor Day weekend in 1989 that I made the best decision of my career. I decided to stop being a wage slave and become my own boss. The Tuesday after Labor Day, I went to work and told the owner of the Boston public relations firm where I worked to, in the immortal words of the David Allan Coe song that Johnny Paycheck made famous, take this job and shove it. Okay, I didn't use those exact words. It was important to leave on good terms because I was hoping the agency would be my first client as I sailed back into the freelance world that I had left nearly 3 years earlier. You see, I had been freelancing for about 18 months when, toward the end of 1986, the agency owner, who had been my biggest and steadiest client, had made me yet another job offer. This, her third offer over about 6 months' time, was prefaced by ominous words. If you don't take this offer, we will hire someone else and won't need you as a freelancer anymore. In other words, my biggest client, the one from whom I made enough each month to pay my mortgage, would be gone. The salary had kept getting progressively better over the 3 offers, and she had finally reached a number that was too good to turn down. So I took the job. Over the next 3 years, I slowly but surely began to regret that decision. If I hadn't crumbled and taken the job, I would have avoided a position where I got little satisfaction from the work, which primarily involved publicizing real estate developers and their projects. A few of these clients were great, even visionary people who sought to build something of lasting value that would make a community better. But during the real estate boom that swept through Greater Boston in the late 1980s, many more of our clients were quick-buck artists with egos the size of the luxury condos they were building across the landscape. One of the clients who fell into the latter group once told me that, and I quote verbatim, a monkey could write a press release. With a straight face, he also told us that he thought we should be getting him on the cover of Time magazine. I wanted to think he was joking with comments like these, but it was clear that he wasn't. It came as no big surprise that he was among the first of the developers we worked with to go bankrupt when the housing market crashed. Even more problematic during my tenure at the agency was that the owner and I strongly disagreed on how the people on the team I managed were to be treated. The last straw was the annual review I had sat in on the Friday before Labor Day, 1989, in which a talented employee, who was one of our very best writers, was excoriated in a way that was completely unwarranted. As I drove home down the Southeast Expressway that evening, my chief thought was that I simply couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't continue working for clients I didn't respect and who didn't respect the people in our firm. I also couldn't continue to play the role of buffer between a constantly hypocritical boss and good, hard-working employees who were deeply unhappy about how they were being treated. Alarm bells sounding, but no one listens. Number 3 on my list of reasons to leave was that it was clear by my second year of employment at the firm that the real estate market in Boston was about to come crashing down. Along with others on the management team, I spent a lot of time talking with the owner about the fact that we needed to diversify the client base. The message fell on deaf ears. The owner had always worked with real estate clients since founding the agency in 1980 and had made a ton of money doing so. She just couldn't see that this gravy train was about to go off the tracks. I feared for my job and everyone else's job if we didn't make some changes soon. It was no surprise to me that within a year after I left, the agency had downsized considerably and was hanging on by a thread. Fortunately, the owner eventually was able to turn things around by diversifying the client base. But she had to do it with a gun to her head, which is never a comfortable situation. In leaving, I felt like I was the first rat leaving a sinking ship. However, by getting out early, I was able to reestablish my relationships with all my former clients before the recession hit. This enabled me to make it through to the other side of the downturn, although it was sometimes a struggle. Being a one-person agency during the recession turned out to be a significant selling point, as companies were seeking lower-priced alternatives for handling their public relations needs. 29 years later, through the good and the lean times, I have never once regretted my choice, especially after seeing friend after friend get kicked to the curb by the corporations to which they devoted decades of their careers. The worst example happened to my friends at Polaroid, all of whom had worked there for the most, if not all, of their careers. When the company went bankrupt in 2001, the Federal Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation agreed to make good on most of their basic pensions, but the rest of their benefits, notably the $300 million in stock Polaroid employees had purchased through the employee stock ownership plan, along with retirement health care and severance packages, were canceled. It was heartbreaking to watch. I have also seen other friends lose jobs repeatedly in successive recessions and who now, in the latter stages of their careers, face the challenge of finding work in an era where companies value youth over experience. As I witness all this, I am very happy that I decided back then not to leave control of my fate in anyone else's hands. Eyes wide open. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2015, 15 million Americans were self-employed. This represents 10.1% of the population. Not included in this number are tens of thousands of people who, in addition to holding down a full-time job, work on their own on nights or weekends, many with the hope of eventually building a business they can pursue full-time. You too might be tempted to try being your own boss. No doubt you have your own set of reasons why you'd like to leave your 9-to-5 gig and try to make a living on your own. Maybe you actually enjoy your current job, but still have a burning desire to create a business of your own. Whatever your motivation, self-employment is definitely worth considering, and I hope it proves feasible for you. Yet, while I never discourage people from following their dreams of becoming their own boss, you really do need to consider all the ramifications of such a big decision. Self-employment is definitely not for everyone, and it particularly is not for people who can't stand the inevitable stresses that are part and parcel of being self-employed. I think I was lucky to be aware very early in life that owning your own business and being the boss is not necessarily a cakewalk. My father owned a small lumber mill in Pennsylvania. Most of the time he had 3 to 5 employees working for him. The lumber business, of course, is one of the most cyclical businesses on the planet. So I saw my father struggle to stay afloat during numerous recessions. Add in Pennsylvania winters when it was impossible to get into the woods to cut timber, and you have a business that was full of rough spots. As I grew into my teens, the burden on my father of having to meet the payroll and the pain he felt at those times when he had to lay off his men was readily apparent to me. There's no going back. With this at-home example in mind, I wasn't expecting self-employment to be a problem-free existence. But over the years, I've seen numerous people leap into self-employment, thinking everything would be ideal if they could just be their own boss. Many have succeeded, but some have not. I always think it must be a very bitter pill to swallow to have to go back into the employment market after failing at self-employment. A big part of me thinks that you really can't go back once you've tasted freedom. I say this after having tried freelancing for nearly 2 years, and then having accepted what was to become my last job. You've already heard about that debacle. So what I really think is that if you're going to become self-employed, you had better make darn sure you get it right so that you don't have to go crawling back into the job market with your tail tucked between your legs. As you consider the upsides of self-employment, of which there are many, I also encourage you to have a realistic view of the potential changes you may face. Being your own boss is great, but there are times when it is clear that it is not the right fit for everyone. So before you dash into your boss's office and sing your own rendition of "Take this job and shove it," listen to the challenges of self-employment that I've experienced or witnessed friends and colleagues experience, and take heed of how we overcame these hurdles with proven coping strategies. To provide you with a wide range of perspectives, I have included comments and advice from several colleagues and clients who all have had long experiences with self-employment. Most of them work as solopreneurs, but one, as you will see, started out working alone and now has employees and subcontractors. Their varied experiences and insights should help broaden your awareness of the issues you should be prepared to deal with if you choose to walk this path. Listen for these comments in the Other Voices sections of the chapters ahead. I thank them all very much for the great additions they've made here. Be sure to check out their bios at the end of the book to learn about the great businesses they've all created for themselves. Some of the challenges I discuss can be avoided simply by knowing about them ahead of time. Others are beyond your control, but by thinking about them in advance, you can decide whether this is a risk you're willing to take. You can also do some advanced preparation that will put you in a better position to deal with some risks should they come along. Also, in reading about the challenges, you may realize that now is just not the right time to try self-employment, but that there is advanced planning you can put in place that will better prepare you for joining the ranks of the self-employed sometime down the road. Now, as my career winds down, I am focused on working with just a couple of clients and devoting significant time to my blog, succeedinginsmallbusiness.com, where my co-bloggers and I share advice on how to make it as a solopreneur or small business owner. As I look back at the full span of my career, which included everything from teaching elementary school to working for small businesses and major national corporations, I can truthfully say that the years I have spent as my own boss have been by far the most intellectually rewarding and happiest part. As you step into the world of self-employment, I hope that you will also be able to look back decades from now and say that same thing of your time out there on your own. Part 1. Now that you work for yourself. Chapter 1. You're the boss now. I wouldn't trade my nearly 3 decades of self-employment for anything. But some days I do wish I had a boss. In essence, I have multiple bosses, namely clients who are all pushing forward their own agendas. Sometimes it would just be nice to have one person who was in charge of telling me exactly what the priorities should be, rather than having to decide for myself each day. This would be particularly helpful on those days when the number of balls I'm juggling seems overwhelming. Before making the leap into the world of self-employment, please carefully consider whether you're really ready to not have a boss, to not have someone who is making the key decisions or confirming for you that your decision is the correct one. Self-employment is extremely stressful if you're not a decisive person. Every day is filled with choices about the direction you're taking your business, what you need to do next to move your business forward, and about the work you're doing for your clients. I am usually quite decisive, to the point where my friends are often stunned by the quickness with which I've made major life choices. But even I sometimes have a problem picking from among the many options I'm faced with as my own boss. If someone like me occasionally feels anxious over trying to figure out what her priorities should be, I could only imagine what it would be like for someone for whom any type of decision-making is a stress-filled chore. Sure, you can seek opinions on key decisions from mentors, colleagues, or family and friends. But when you're self-employed, in the end, it all comes down to you. You are the one who will have to make the decisions that will determine if you succeed. Will you be comfortable with this? Some people welcome the opportunity to finally show that they can make it on their own. They've felt reined in and have been dying to be the decision maker. But plenty of others leap into self-employment without considering that the proverbial buck will now stop at their desk. If, upon reflection, your stomach gets a little queasy at the notion of having to be the decider, then perhaps you should consider delaying your dream of self-employment until you become more comfortable with decision-making. It is quite possible that once you get more professional experience and more life experience under your belt, you will become more at ease with decision-making and be better prepared for life without a boss. If you happen to be one of the unlucky people who has a bad boss, having no boss at all probably seems awfully attractive. In fact, that was one of the top 5 reasons I became self-employed. I chafed under the micromanagement of my last boss, so I quit and didn't look back. If you find yourself in a similar situation, before making such a move, please thoroughly consider the ramifications of having no boss at all. If you have problems with decision-making, perhaps a better move would be to find a new job with a better boss. If you've already made the leap to self-employment and are now struggling with decision-making, try these coping strategies. Coping strategies. Know your decision-making style. Some of us need to thoroughly research all our options before reaching a decision. Others go more with gut instinct. Some of us fall somewhere in between, which is probably the best place to be. Understand your style and try to reach a happy medium that enables you to move forward without getting mired in endless research or making a snap decision you will soon regret. Don't overthink everything. Some choices are so big that they deserve a lot of thought. But I know people who vacillate over every step of daily life, beginning with what cereal to have for breakfast. Don't be that person. Make choices and stick with them as you move through your workday, unless you receive information that gives you good reason to shuffle the items on your to-do list. Have a friendly sounding board. While I recommend finding a good mentor who has walked in your shoes and can give you the voice of experience, I also think it's good to talk over a decision you're facing with someone who is just a really good friend. This person will likely have known you longer than your mentor and probably knows your personality better because they've seen you in all sorts of situations over many years. Someone like this can provide valuable input that is based on experience with you rather than on their own experience with self-employment. Listening to someone like this can be very helpful, since they know your tendencies with decision-making and may help you avoid a choice you might regret later. Trust your intuition. When faced with a decision, often your first thought is your best thought. By learning to trust this gut instinct, which, after all, is derived from your life experience and your knowledge of the topic involved, you should significantly shorten the amount of time you spend dithering. Other voices. Barbara Rodriguez started her interpreting and translation services business in Springfield, Massachusetts, in 2001. I met her a few years later when her business was located at the Springfield Business Incubator, for which I was writing a newsletter. Here's what Barbara says on being the boss. I'm sure you've heard about how lonely it is at the top. That's because you have no one to consult with. The buck stops with you, and it can be frightening. Take the time to think things through. Sleep on it. At the beginning, I would make decisions quickly and then live to regret them. It took me many years to learn to sleep on decisions, and I mean that literally. Things are always clearer in the morning. You have to think about how a decision you make today will affect your business into the future. Are you taking on obligations you can't meet? Are you cutting yourself short? How is the market changing, and how will those changes affect you? Can you deliver the goods and/or services on time? Again, meditation really helps me to see all angles of a situation. And again, sleep on it. I've known Howie Green since 1973, when we worked in the corporate communications department of a large insurance company in Boston. Howie describes himself as a graphic designer, illustrator, and reluctant writer, but I would add that he is a very talented artist. He first was self-employed for a 3-year period beginning in 1979. Then he returned to self-employment permanently in 1984. Here are his thoughts on being the boss. In my youth, I worked for a lot of people, and I never had a boss who I thought had a clue as to what he or she was doing. I always thought I would make better decisions than they would, and I was right. So with that kind of an ego, I needed to work for myself. Chapter 2. Make working from home work. In the mid-1980s, I did a 2-year stint of freelancing before reverting back to being an employee again. I worked out of my condo on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston's Back Bay. Because some buildings on the street had been converted from residential to commercial space, unless someone specifically knew the building I lived in, they would not know I was working from home. A number of people advised me not to let people know I worked from home. Home offices were not yet common in the mid-1980s, so these well-meaning friends feared I would look less serious about my business because I hadn't rented office space. I didn't think it was necessary to conceal where I worked, so I ignored this advice. What I found was that people didn't even ask where my office was, and those times when I did reveal that I worked at home, no one ever made a negative comment. Flash forward to the second decade of the new millennium, when working from a home office has become so common that now when I tell people I work from home, the response is likely to be, "So do I," or quite often, "Oh, I wish I could do that." To the latter group, I am always tempted to say, yes, it is great, but it is not without challenges and probably isn't for everybody. Discipline is required. If you're going to set your new business up in your home, be aware that this requires a fair amount of discipline. When you look around your house, you can always see a chore that needs to be done. It's very easy to find that an hour has breezed by wherein instead of doing billable work, you've emptied the dishwasher, put clean sheets on the bed, thrown a load of laundry in the washing machine, made a grocery shopping list, and watered the plants. I'm kind of lucky in this regard because, frankly, I'm not much of a housekeeper. I can easily ignore household chores, but I do know people with home offices who find it very challenging to stay at their desk when, for example, they notice dust on the bookshelves, or they look out the window and see that the grass could stand to be mowed. A client once wrote to me about a challenge she'd been having with her home office that is also common. Her partner had recently retired and was now hanging about the house all day. The possibilities for distraction when you have someone at home with you while you're working are endless. I know this all too well, because since 2002, I have also lived with a retired person who is at home during the day. That was a problem before we moved to Durham in 2013, because in our former home, my office didn't have a door that I could shut. When we moved south, one of my top criteria in a new house was that I would be able to have an office with a door. If you have children living at home, that, of course, greatly increases the chances of being interrupted. No matter how well you school them on the sanctity of your work hours, distractions are bound to occur. A good friend who is blessed with girls who have musical talents tells me of trying to do a conference call during an impromptu clarinet practice. It isn't just the people you live with who have the idea that because you work at home and control your own hours, They can interrupt you in ways they probably would not if you had a 9-to-5 job in an office. Just because you encourage your friends and relations to call or drop by in the evenings instead of during the day doesn't mean they will always follow these instructions. There seems to be something about the mere fact that you are at home that makes people think it's okay to interrupt you. Most of us like to be as kind as possible to our friends, especially if they're suffering through some crisis and need a shoulder to lean on. Saying, "I'm sorry, I'm busy and can't talk now," can be tough in some circumstances. But if you don't, you're apt to find that another part of your day has flown by without any progress on your work. So you end up working into the evening or making up hours on the weekend. The isolation blues. Paradoxically, while some of the problems that arise when you work at home come from other people, you can also suffer from isolation when you have a home office. I think that is what stopped me from setting firm rules with my housemate, now husband, about when it's okay for him to sit down in my office for a chat. Previous to him moving in, I had worked at home alone for 13 years. Many days I had no client meetings or even client phone calls, so by the end of the workday, I had spent many hours without speaking to another living being, except for Jasper, the cat. He moved in with me on the day I opened my business, and he wasn't much of a conversationalist, except when it came to demanding to be fed. If you're naturally an introvert, working by yourself at home can sometimes make that tendency to want to be alone even stronger, even to the point where you might develop definite antisocial habits. The problem with this is that if you're going to build a business, you will need to get out and network. So don't get too comfortable spending all of your time alone. When all is said and done, though, I wouldn't trade working at home for anything. If you go into it with an awareness of the challenges I've mentioned, you will probably love it too. Coping strategies. Establish ground rules about when it's okay to interrupt you. If you don't establish this principle from the start, it's very hard to put your foot down later. To avoid interruptions from those you live with, set your office up in a room with a door that can be closed when you're working. If that's not possible, come up with other means for closing off the room, such as folding screens or a curtain that you hang across the entryway. It also helps to buy a "Do Not Disturb" sign to hang on your office door. My sign says, "Do not disturb. Genius at work." That last point is a rash overstatement, but the sign gets the point across when I hang it on the doorknob. That won't eliminate all problems with the people you live with interrupting your work, but it's a good start. Develop the willpower to let calls go to voicemail. Caller ID is a wonderful gift to the self-employed, whether you're working at home or in rented office space. The challenge is that you have to overcome what I think for most people is a natural tendency to answer that ringing phone. Caller ID is a workaround for those friends and relatives who simply can't get it through their heads that you're doing real work in your home office. I always answer client calls, of course, but I pick and choose among other callers depending on how immersed I am with work, or whether I am expecting someone to call about something important, like what time we're meeting up for after-work cocktails. The rest can go to voicemail, and I'll call them back when my work is done. Have a heart-to-heart talk with repeat offenders. You may have friends or relatives who just can't grasp what it means when you say you're working at home. I guess the thought that goes through their heads is, "Oh, she's at home," never, "Oh, she's working." Invite a repeat offender out to breakfast or lunch and deliver a two-part message. First, talk about how much you're enjoying working at home and how important it is for you to succeed at being self-employed. Gently, or not so gently, depending on what style of communication you normally use with this individual, work in the fact that non-work-related phone calls or unannounced drop-in visits during the day are a real problem for you. Part 2 of this communication involves letting the person know that they are an important part of your life and that you will still have time for them even though you are now self-employed. Even though it's you who is shifting to self-employment, You may find that relatives or friends may worry about what this change will mean to their relationship with you. They may be worrying that you will be working night and day and won't have time for them. A little reassurance may go a long way to alleviate this fear and to help them understand that you can't always take their calls. With very close relatives, like your mom or a sibling, perhaps you can agree on a set time each day for a check-in phone call. Ideally, this will be before your workday gets started or when it's ended, or perhaps you agree to call mom at lunchtime each day. Find strategies to overcome the isolation if you live and work alone. Yes, working alone can be isolating, and I'll write more on this in Part 4. This is less true if you're renting office space and have regular interactions with people in the offices around you. But when you're at home, and especially if you live alone, you definitely need to develop ways to cope with the intense isolation you can experience on some days. I strongly recommend going out for at least a bit of face-to-face human contact once a day. When I lived alone, I always went out at lunch to grab a takeout salad, go to the post office, or maybe stop by my bank, where, to paraphrase the Cheers song, everybody knew my name. Just having someone say, "Hi, Jeanne, how are you today?" was enough to perk me up. Recognize that you have options. If you find that working from home just isn't your thing, the good news is that today you have affordable options that weren't available just a few short years ago. You don't need to take on the expense of renting solo office space. With options such as co-working space becoming available all across the country, you can join with other independent workers to share the expense of the office space and its amenities, while at the same time solving the problem of isolation. Such workspaces also often present excellent networking opportunities that may lead to new business coming your way. Other voices. Barbara Rodriguez. The downside to working from home is that no one actually believes you're working. People think they can interrupt you at any time because, after all, you work from home. I try to set strict chunks of time that I devote only to work. It's tempting to throw in a load of wash, start dinner, and get involved in a million little things that need doing. What ends up happening is that you work 24 hours a day trying to catch up on things, until you realize it's never ending. Howie Green. What has changed for me over the past 15 years is that no one knows where the hell I'm working from anymore. Or cares. I'm home. I'm in Florida. I'm in New York. I'm in Starbucks. As long as they can reach me, that's all that matters. And since most communications now take place through email or texting, it's even goofier. Recently, I completed a digital illustration for a client on a bus trip from New York City to Boston and emailed it to them from the bus when it was done. They loved it, so I invoiced them. From the bus. Chapter 3. Don't sell yourself short. One of the most important decisions you make when you enter the ranks of the self-employed is to set a price for the services you're rendering or the product you're selling. Many factors go into this calculation, including the prices being charged by your competitors, your skill level and amount of experience, who your clients are. Corporations can pay more than nonprofits, for example, and how much competition there is in your field. This can all be very puzzling to someone who has always received a paycheck from an employer, and it's all too easy to make a mistake and sell yourself short. Here are a couple of the sticking points I've seen people get hung up on when they initially set their rates. Overestimating the number of hours you can actually bill each week. Starting out, many people assume they'll be able to bill every single hour of their working day. For people who are coming from an environment where they were billing their hours to clients, ad, media, or PR agencies, law firms, or consulting groups, for example, this is an easy mistake to make. Unless you're involved in business development for these types of employers, it is likely that the vast majority of your time is, in fact, billable work. It's easy to ignore the fact that other people in the firm are devoting many unbillable hours to bringing in new clients, marketing, hiring, and other duties that come with running a business. Once you're out on your own, you are the one who is responsible for all the non-billable activities that it takes to build and maintain a business. You have to set aside time for the new business development activities, like networking and proposal writing, that will help grow your client list. Obviously, in the early days, the time required for business development activities is significant, and while these hours decrease as time goes by, they never truly go away as clients come and go. You also have to allow time to do billing, bookkeeping, buying supplies, and other administrative tasks that keep your business flowing smoothly. You'll be surprised how much time these activities eat up. Even mundane tasks, like driving to the office supply store to buy printer ink, take time that you didn't have to lose when you were employed by someone else and just had to walk to the supply closet to get a new ink cartridge. Finally, remember that you won't have paid sick days or paid vacation as you probably did with your former employer. So when you are calculating how many hours you hope to work a year in order to earn the annual income you desire, you have to allow for these periods when you won't be earning income. Granted, your first year or two when you're building your business, you might decide against taking anything more than a 3-day weekend now and then. But as you'll see in the chapter on burnout in Part 4, there are many reasons why you should start scheduling time off as soon as your business has grown to the point where you're on secure financial ground. Lowballing your hourly rate to get your foot in the door. It is very tempting, especially when you're starting out, to set a low hourly rate on the theory that this is the way to bring in business fast. But if this hourly rate is not enough to pay your bills, you'll soon find out that this strategy was a big mistake. You'll have to work an unsustainable number of hours to make up for the low hourly rate. Recognize that once you set a rate with a client, it is something you're going to have to live with for a while. Yes, you can go up a bit each year or every 2 years, but if you really lowballed the rate to begin with, say for example, charging 30% less than you should be charging to stay afloat, it will take years before you can get up to the rate you really need to survive. Don't expect to be able to just raise your rates by leaps and bounds with existing clients. They won't like it much and may go in search of someone else who is willing to give them a bargain rate. And if the economy is in trouble, don't expect to be able to raise your rates at all, because your clients will be hurting financially and won't be willing to accept rate increases. They'll be thinking that they're not making more money, so why should you? Of course, as new clients come along, you can begin to charge them a higher rate. But this then puts you in the awkward position of working for some clients at a rate that is too low, while you're working with others with a better rate. It would not be unusual in this situation to become resentful toward clients who are paying less. That's not a position you want to be in for very long, because it puts you at risk of thinking perhaps it's okay to cut corners for the low-paying clients, who are only low-paying because that's what you decided to charge them in the first place. Not doing your homework to understand what your skills and experience are worth in the marketplace. When you start asking people how they determined what their hourly rate should be, many appear to have picked a number out of a hat. Some people take the equally poor conceived approach of just charging the same rate that they were billing at with their former employer. While some people overestimate what they should be charging, it has been my observation that far more people start out undervaluing themselves. And this isn't just a problem with newly self-employed people. I've met people who have been self-employed for a while, who still aren't charging the rates they could and should be charging to earn a decent living without having to work a ridiculous number of hours. Many resources are available for researching competitive rates in your locale for your type of work based on your skill level and experience. Don't skip this step. Also, don't make the mistake of looking at average national rates and assuming that's what you should charge. Rates in many professions vary significantly by geographic area. For example, when I moved from the greater Boston area to western Massachusetts, I found I had to lower my rate by about 20%. Companies in Western Massachusetts were much less familiar with the services of a public relations consultant and ghostwriter, and thus were not willing, at least initially, to pay the kind of rates that were typical of Boston until I had proven my worth. Within a couple of years, I was able to raise my rates a bit so that they were closer to what I had charged clients in Boston. The Internet's impact. While we're talking about geographic regions, I should also mention the impact of the global economy on hourly rates for skills such as computer programming, web design, copywriting, and other work that can be done remotely. Before the Internet, if you chose to freelance, you were competing primarily with people in your region. Now you can be up against people in foreign countries who, for the most part, charge rates so low that it would be difficult for you to survive if you charged similar rates. I volunteer for a nonprofit whose webmasters are in Eastern Europe. Also, when I posted on Twitter that I was looking for a local web design company to redesign my blog, meaning someone in the Research Triangle area of North Carolina, I received more responses from people overseas than I did from local companies. Also, websites such as Upwork.com, Freelancer.com, and similar online markets, while offering you the opportunity to sell your skills worldwide, have also driven down hourly rates through their bidding processes. I quickly gave up trying to bid for work on these sites after I realized that the going rate for the type of work I do was generally less than half of what I was charging existing clients. Coping strategies. Don't plan on billing 40 hours week in and week out. A number in the 25 to 30-hour range in terms of billable hours is more achievable and sustainable over a long period of time. Never forget that you will be doing many hours of work that aren't billable: bookkeeping, new business development, networking, and the like. So your week will be much longer than just the 25 to 30 billable hours. Trying for more billable hours per week sets you up for working long hours, which, of course, many of us do from time to time. But ideally, this is not your normal mode of working, because that will inevitably lead to burnout. And besides, many of us choose self-employment precisely because we want to have more work-life balance than many employers provide these days. Look at your monthly expenses, including your living expenses and what it will cost you to run your business. Don't forget to include the cost of benefits, which you will now be providing for yourself, as well as federal and state income taxes and the self-employment and Medicare taxes. Then add in a reasonable profit so you'll be able to save for retirement and to enjoy life a little and not just break even. How many hours at what rate will you have to bill a month to get to your desired monthly income? Another approach to this calculation is to start out with the annual income that will keep you solvent and happy and then work back from there. No matter which way you do your calculating, you will still need to do a reality check to make sure the hourly rate you come up with is achievable among the clients you hope to work with. Which brings us to the next coping strategy. Do your homework so that you know what people with your abilities and experience typically make in your region. Then you can feel confident when you tell a prospect about your rates. This confident attitude will help convince that person that the rate is reasonable and justified. If, on the other hand, you're not confident about the rate you're proposing, that insecurity will also come across and undermine your position. So don't skimp on your research or on rehearsing how to sound confident when you talk about your rates. In short, don't undersell yourself. That's not the path to success. Be prepared to respond when potential clients tell you they can hire someone overseas at half your price. Given what I've said above about the impact of the Internet, it is inevitable that someone will push back on your proposed rate by quoting a lower rate they've received from someone in India or Romania. Fortunately, you have a load of good arguments to make in such cases. The time difference alone adds an unnecessary level of difficulty to working with someone overseas and definitely slows things down. Also, unless the person being hired overseas is a U.S. expat, there may be language and cultural differences that will impede a client's ability to communicate exactly what they mean or want. Yes, the overseas freelancer may speak English, but do they really understand all the American idioms that your client is apt to use? Or will the client constantly have to figure out new ways to explain things? In addition, building trust with someone an ocean away is difficult and takes time. So if your client hopes to build a long-term working relationship with the vendor they're hiring, they'd be better off doing so with someone they can meet face-to-face. Also, be ready to talk about what backs up your proposed rate, your depth of experience and breadth of skills. This goes not just for when someone says they can find someone overseas to do the work at half your rate, but also when anyone questions why you're charging what you're charging. Be careful how you communicate any rate increases. Sooner or later, you're going to need to raise your rates, even if it's just to keep up with the costs of living. Be smart about how you do this. I read an article in Entrepreneur magazine in which someone had written in with a question about how to do this. He planned to raise his rates beginning in January, and he was asking whether he could just include the higher rates on the January invoices without giving his clients prior notice. Well, yeah, he could do that if his greatest desire was to seriously tick off his clients. What a dope. When communicating fee hikes, the best route is to be as formal as possible. I've generally implemented rake hikes at the start of a new year by sending out letters in late November. Note that I said letters, not emails. For me, emails are not for major news. And besides, they sort of invite comment, whereas letters don't. Although, of course, in your letter, you definitely should ask clients to call you if they have concerns about the increase. The first time I sent out these letters, I was nervous, thinking I'd probably get a lot of pushback. I've done it a number of times now, and don't recall ever having anyone react negatively. At most, some clients have acknowledged at our next meeting that they received the notice. Of course, I haven't raised my rates by leaps and bounds. Usually it's only about $10 to $20 an hour. And as I mentioned earlier, I haven't done this every year, usually only every 2 to 3 years. If you need to raise your rates significantly year after year, it means you probably didn't set a reasonable rate to begin with, which is one more reason to make sure you do the homework necessary to get your rate right from the get-go. Gradually, either cull low-paying clients from your client roster or get them up to a rate that is closer to what you really need to earn. You'll find that some clients just can't afford to pay higher rates. Wish them well and bid them a fond adieu. If you happen to know someone else who is just starting out and who may be charging a lower rate than you are based on their having less experience, then by all means refer the business to them. Both parties will thank you. If you really enjoy working with a low-paying client and believe they could afford to pay closer to what your other clients are paying, have a serious chat with them about this. You don't have to make up the difference in rates in one fell swoop, but if you can gradually move them in the right direction, it's worth a try before you write them off as clients. An honest discussion is the best way to reconcile this gap, or at least make them aware of it. Who knows? They may find other ways to compensate you, or make it worth your while to stick with them. Then, of course, there are cases where you see huge potential for a low-paying client down the road. If they're working on something that may significantly increase their fortunes at some point, you may want to stick with them. Just keep in mind that you will have no guarantee that their gravy train will come in, or that they'll stick with you long enough for you to benefit from their increased fortunes. I've known cases in which self-employed consultants have even taken stock options in startups in the hope of being part of a big cash payout. This is another option to consider if you're working with this type of organization. Finally, recognize that some clients have value that goes beyond the income they provide. For example, if a low-paying client sends you a steady stream of good referrals that have translated into business for you, it might very well be worth keeping them around, even if they are paying a lower rate than other clients. Also, if a client is in an industry where you'd like to make inroads, keeping them on your client roster might be wise, at least until you've signed up a few more clients in that industry. Or if they're giving you an assignment in an area where you need to enhance your skills, that might be another reason to stick with them for a while longer. Other voices. Carol Savage and I met in 1983 when we served as the Public Relations Department at Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital in Boston. She began her freelance career in public relations and marketing communications in 1992, and since then, we have shared numerous clients. She is my go-to person when my plate gets too full and I need help. Here's what Carol says about this topic. If you're competing with someone in a foreign country for a piece of business, the other thing you should point out to the potential client is that speaking on the phone or via Skype with someone with a foreign accent can be very stressful. I know I have a hard time with it. It takes longer, and I keep having to clarify what they are saying, what I'm hearing. Also, there are cultural nuances, obviously, that could be time-consuming to explain. Backfill. Again, another potential time suck. Also, if you get pushback on your rate from anyone, you should be prepared to give them the names of clients who are happy to speak about the relationship between your rate and the value you provide. When it comes to finding colleagues who might be willing to work at a lower rate, you may know someone who is working part-time and welcomes smaller projects for less pay. They may want to temporarily keep their hand in the business or be trying to launch their own business and be willing to take a lower rate due to their lack of experience. It's good to share, including lower rate business, with the appropriate people in your network, and they'll thank you. Barbara Rodriguez. Selling yourself short is a topic near and dear to my heart. When I was starting out, a friend recommended a book called The Secrets of Six-Figure Women, Surprising Strategies to Up Your Earnings and Change Your Life, by Barbara Stanny. I actually gave a copy of this book to my project manager when I first hired her. Women, especially, find it hard to ask for what they're worth. When asked our hourly rate, we tend to shrink, not meet the client's eyes, and say something like, "Well, what do you think about $50 per hour?" This is not the way to do it. You have to confidently stand your ground. Look your potential client right in the eyes and say, "We charge $50 per hour." It's a kind of take-it-or-leave-it mentality. This is a rather simplistic example, but the book should be required reading for every budding female entrepreneur, or, for that matter, anyone who needs help in being confident and assertive in their dealings with customers. Howie Green. With the massive technology changes over the past 20 years, a lot of what I do is no longer a mystery. Logo design, My clients can do their own online now for $20, so why pay me $500? 9-year-old kids now can discuss fonts like professional designers. I can't possibly compete with those trends. So when clients call me and really want to work with me because I'm so swell and talented and blah blah, but only have a budget of $100, I steer them on a course to do it themselves or get their 9-year-old to do it for them. It is not going to be worth my time to sell myself short to make $100. Gene Simmons of the rock group Kiss found a Kiss t-shirt in a thrift shop that was priced at $3. He insisted on paying $25 for it because he said, "Never devalue your diamonds." I think that's great advice. Pat Mullally is a talented graphic designer who has been a friend and colleague for many years. She opened her firm, Circle Graphics, in Hull, Massachusetts, in 1988, and now lives and works on Cape Cod. Here's what Pat has to say about setting hourly rates. One of the worst things an entrepreneur can do is to buy the job. It's especially tempting when you first start out or find yourself with few projects on your calendar and a sense of panic that no one will ever want to work with you again. Rather than be firm in communicating your hourly or project rate and sticking to it, you agree to work for whatever the client is willing to pay. Big mistake. Word will spread, and you'll never get the kind of work you really want at the rates you actually deserve. When a client tells you that your fee for doing X, Y, and Z is more than he wants to pay, counter with an alternative. You could do X and Y, but not Z. Let the client decide what gets left out of the project, but don't lower your rates to accommodate his budget. Chapter 4. Managing your time. Every once in a while, I have one of those days when things just get away from me. For example, I recall one day when I was facing a deadline on a very important project and came to my desk in the morning with every intention of cranking out a lot of writing. Next thing I knew, it was 4:00 p.m., and between unexpected phone calls, emails that needed immediate attention, and a minor but time-consuming household crisis, I had managed to write one paragraph. Okay, I confess. There was some really interesting stuff on Facebook and Twitter that day, too, that grabbed my attention. Mea culpa. We all have workdays like that, but when you're self-employed, every billable hour counts, so the impact of wasted time is significantly greater than if you have a steady paycheck coming from your employer at the end of the week or month. Every time I manage to fritter away a morning or an afternoon or, heaven forbid, a whole day, either my bank account feels the impact or I end up working on the weekend to make up the time. While the phone calls and emails I was responding to that wasted day were client-related, it is often hard to bill this time. This is especially true when you're working on a fixed project budget. If you end up with a client who needs more hand-holding than you anticipated when you set the budget, you're stuck with writing off much of that time. If you experience more than the occasional day that gets away from you, accept that you need to learn more about how to manage your time. Many good books are available on this topic, or you may be able to find a course, workshop, or webinar that would help you improve your time management skills. If you hope to stay self-employed for very long, this is definitely one challenge that you'll have to overcome as much as possible. For the self-employed, time is indeed money. Take better control of your time, and you will see a direct correlation between that and your income. Coping strategies. Take control of the little things. It's important to be responsive to clients and to not leave them dangling without information they need from you. So if I'm at my desk, I pick up the phone when a client calls instead of letting it go to voicemail, and I answer client emails as promptly as I can. Most of the time this works fine, except when a flood of such disruptions completely takes me out of the flow of writing. At such times, I change my behaviors to reduce the possibility of interruptions. This means not opening my web browser to check on Twitter or Facebook, and not responding to individual emails as they come in, but rather answering the ones from the morning as a group at noon, and then the ones that come in the afternoon at 4 p.m. Unless the phone rings, this gives me wide swaths of time in which to write. Set expectations with clients. When I'm under the gun with a large project for someone, I let other major clients know when they can expect me to surface again. Some people will argue that alerting one client that you're trying to finish a big project for someone else is a dangerous thing. This fear is based on the theory that you should strive to make every client feel they're your most important focus at any one time. But with rare exceptions, I find clients are very understanding, possibly because many of my clients are also self-employed and understand what it's like to juggle priorities. Of course, I do try to reassure them by giving them a clear idea of when to expect to hear from me again regarding progress on their project. And then I make sure I stick with this projection. Don't fill your plate too full. Don't take on more work than you can manage to do and do well. The stress that comes with trying to juggle too many assignments at once will invariably lead to time management problems. Instead of being intently focused on your work, you're likely to find yourself staring off into space, fretting about how you'll get it all done. Sleepless nights will lead to unproductive days. Make sure your office is well organized to promote efficiency. Something as simple as having your office organized by a professional organizer so that everything can be easily and quickly found can save you time and is well worth the small investment required. This is especially true if you have a hard time adhering to the old adage about a place for everything and everything in its place. Even if you're far more like Oscar in The Odd Couple than you are like Felix when it comes to neatness, a professional organizer can set up systems for you that will help you keep the chaos to a minimum. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard has been a client of mine since early 2008. He started his entrepreneurial career at about age 12, buying and selling flowers, and then later worked with several media internet initiatives. His first real startup, full-time, was at age 21. Based in Copenhagen, today Stefan is a global thought leader on leadership and corporate innovation management. Here are his tips on time management. Being flexible with time is one of your greatest assets when you are self-employed. This can give you a good work-life balance, and it can help you work at the times of the day where you are most productive. It is amazing how much you can get done if you'll find the right burst versus trying to force things to get done. Know how this works for you and use it to your advantage. Barbara Rodriguez. I'm very obsessed about having a well-organized office and a clean desk. I find that if I have a messy desk and unorganized files, my mind follows suit, my production suffers, and I get much more stressed out. At the end of the day, I make a list of things in order of importance that I plan to work on the next morning. I think this has always served me well, both in college and in business. Howie Green. A wise man once said that if you want to get something done, ask someone who is busy, because they know how to manage their time. I have been busy since 1972. I am glad and grateful for that fact, and it has taught me how to manage my time. It's a lot like eating the vegetables on your dinner plate. No one wants to eat them, but you have to. So get the unpleasant tasks completed, and you will have more time for the stuff you like to do. Pat Mullally. One of the biggest advantages to working on your own is planning how you will spend your time. Recognize the best time of day for you to do your best and most productive work, and schedule that time into your plan. Email and social media tools are great, but they are enormous time suckers. Plan your online time carefully. Prioritize tasks the night before if you can. Money-making tasks should be done first thing, and all the other nitty-gritty stuff goes last. Stick to your plan. Chapter 5. Keeping up with new skills. Ever have a conversation with a professional colleague where it becomes clear that they aren't as up to speed as you'd expect them to be on a new development in their field? For example, I take it for granted that someone who works in public relations as I do would be knowledgeable about and engaged in social media. But now and then I have a conversation in which it's clear the alleged PR expert I'm talking with is clueless about how Twitter actually works, or why Pinterest or Instagram might interest their clients who sell consumer products. Not keeping your professional skills and knowledge current is dangerous for anyone. If you're self-employed, allowing your skills to become outdated can put you at a severe competitive disadvantage. But the problem is that it's even tougher to keep up to date when you're self-employed because no one is going to pay you to get the needed training. When I worked in corporate America, my employers made sure I got training in any skills they wanted me to have. This training was either provided in-house or I was sent to conferences and seminars put on by outside organizations. And of course, I was being paid the whole time I was receiving this training. One employer paid for everything but my textbooks when I decided to get a master's in journalism at Boston University to augment my writing skills. I was even given time off during the workday to take a couple courses that weren't offered at night. Can't get much better than that for being able to add an important credential to my resume on someone else's dime. In contrast, when you are self-employed, any training you get is at your own expense and on your own time. Take an hour out of your afternoon to listen to a webinar, and that is 1 hour in which you're not earning income or working to bring in new business. Nobody is going to pay your fees and travel expenses if you want to go to an industry conference or meeting. When new technology comes along that you need to master, that definitely can be time-consuming and, in some cases, may even involve adding a new expense to your monthly costs. A poor trade-off. Self-employed people who don't invest time and money in keeping up to date are focusing on the short term and ignoring the dire long-term consequences of not staying current with developments in their field. I know it's sometimes tough to add one more thing to an already busy schedule, especially when you might not see immediate payback. But take this approach for too long, and clients and prospective clients will begin to notice. Sure, if necessary, you can always outsource portions of projects that involve skills you have not yet mastered. But this involves sharing part of your income with someone else, which isn't something you really want to do over the long haul, especially if it involves skills that are becoming integral to your profession. Regularly devoting time to professional learning makes much more sense and will help ensure that you maintain that competitive edge. Coping strategies. Set learning goals. Keeping our skills up to date is something we all know we should do, but it is also something that it's easy to procrastinate about. So set a learning goal each quarter and hold yourself accountable for doing something that increases your professional expertise and your marketability. Even if this goal is minimal, such as listening to one webinar a month, you will still be further ahead than if you didn't set such a goal and just let another year fly by without doing anything to enhance your skills. Find inexpensive learning opportunities. So much information is available for free online now that cost should really not prohibit you from staying abreast of the new developments in your field. How did I learn about social media? By jumping right in, and by reading lots of articles and a book or two. Beware of the multitude of online sellers who want to fleece you of hundreds of dollars to reveal the secrets of social media. It really is all there on the web for free. Also, check out resources in your community, such as your local community college, especially their continuing education department, or their small business development center, where you will find any number of courses and workshops that can help you get up to speed on topics in your field, as well as general business skill courses that will help you do a better job of running your business. Choose conferences carefully. Conferences are an expensive way to learn about emerging developments in your field, so be judicious about which conferences you choose to attend. I recommend local or regional conferences over a national conference for 2 reasons. 1. Your travel costs will be lower, and 2. In addition to any learning you might gain, you are more likely to get the added benefit of making contacts that might pay dividends in terms of building your local network. Ignore this advice if you, like me, are able to work with clients all across the country thanks to today's communication tools. At the last national conference I paid my own way to, I gained a new client in Utah, someone I never would have met if I only attended regional conferences. Make the most of your professional association memberships. Professional associations are great resources for learning what's new and exciting in your profession. If yours produces a journal, read it from cover to cover. When choosing which meetings to attend, pick the ones where you're likely to learn something new that would be beneficial to your business. Also, see if your association has an interest group that might be appropriate for you. For example, when I belonged to the Boston chapter of the Public Relations Society of America, we formed a subgroup made up of freelancers, but we also held monthly meetings where one of us would present on a topic of interest. This group was also good for pointing me toward good learning tools and resources. If your chapter of your professional society doesn't have something like this for self-employed individuals, consider starting one. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. I often share a little piece of advice with corporate innovators in the context of innovation upgrade, skills, and mindset. Although my version is specific to innovation leaders, I think it applies broadly to everyone when it comes to keeping your skills up to date. So here goes. When you wake up in the morning, go to the bathroom and take a deep, hard look in the mirror and ask yourself 2 questions. Be very honest when answering them. 1. Do I really have what it takes to move the innovation efforts and capabilities forward in my company? Most people end up with a half-hearted yes. Others know something is wrong, and a very few people can give a confident yes. 2. Do I have a process to stay sharp on this? Insert your own field of expertise into these questions and ask yourself whether you are on top of what you need to be on top of to truly serve your clients. Barbara Rodriguez. Outdated skills or lack of skills can make or break you. There was a time when knowing how to type and write a business letter was enough. That's all changed, and if you're top dog, it's all on you because you have to monitor the skills, or lack thereof, of your employees. The most important skill is communication, both oral and written. Everything else you can outsource with the exception of knowing how to read and analyze your financials, profit and loss, balance sheet and collections. Ideally, you should know how to use both a Mac and PC and have knowledge of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and some kind of customer tracking software. You should be up to date on social media, and your spelling should be impeccable. Finding employees who can spell has become more and more difficult. The problem is that people don't seem to understand the importance of good writing and spelling. For us, it's critical. We're a translation company, for God's sake. Howie Green. Oh, this is a huge issue for everyone now. Technology and the skills required to use technology are constantly changing. If you don't keep up, you're roadkill. I know many of my peers who just left the field because they didn't want to or couldn't deal with technology. On a daily basis, I use an Apple computer, a Windows computer, an iPad, an Android smartphone, and a dozen or so software applications. When I started out as a designer, all I needed was a pencil and a phone. Chapter 6. Trying to be all things to all people. When you're first getting your business off the ground, or any time you experience a cash flow ebb, it is tempting to jump at any project, even if it's something you're not an expert in, or even enjoy doing. This trying to be all things to all people might bring in your initial clients, or solve short-term cash flow problems, but in the long run, it can get you in trouble. In an ideal world, you perform work you're highly qualified to do, and therefore, you're doing a fabulous job for everyone. Also, you love what you do, and this shows in the results. Contrast this with what happens when you take on a project that isn't really your thing. Maybe it doesn't match your key skills, or you don't have a lot of experience in it, but you've managed to sell yourself to the client anyway, chiefly because they don't know enough about what the job requires to understand why your experience isn't a good fit. Or perhaps it's something you are qualified to do, but hate doing. In the vast majority of cases like this, problems are bound to ensue. Maybe you do an okay but not great job, but as we all know, okay doesn't cut it in today's competitive environment. The client is disappointed and decides not to hire you again, even for projects which you are eminently well qualified. Worse yet, they may badmouth you to others. Oh, don't hire that guy. He did a lousy job for me. Yikes. Or in cases where you are qualified to do the work, but it is something you dread doing, the outcome can be just as bad. If your heart isn't in the work, the results usually show that. You can fool clients, but don't. I was thinking of this a few years ago when I began to revise the website copy for a longtime friend of mine. As I read the copy she had hired someone to write 3 or 4 years previously, I couldn't believe how bad it was. It violated basic web copy rules. It featured lengthy paragraphs and language that was not the least bit engaging. It was a snooze fest. When I realized the scope of the problem, I asked my friend who had written the copy. She told me the person's name, and I asked, "Does she have a lot of experience writing website copy?" "No. She has a lot of experience as a writer, but not with websites. You were busy at the time, so I hired her instead." My friend had made a big mistake of thinking that writing is writing, not realizing that writing copy for a website is significantly different than writing, for example, a marketing brochure. This is a common misunderstanding, so I wasn't as disappointed by my friend's lack of understanding as I was with that writer who agreed to do her website. That person was trying to be all things to all people, and in doing so, left my friend with a website that did nothing for her business over a long period of time. Coping strategies. Never mislead clients about the extent of your skills and experience. Know what your strengths are, as well as your weaknesses. Always remember that the client's interests should remain uppermost in your mind. Sure, it may be possible to make a quick buck from someone who doesn't know the right questions to ask you to determine your qualifications, and you may even end up doing a half-decent job. But then again, you may very well bite off more than you can chew if you tackle a project for which you're not really prepared. Your reputation will invariably suffer if you stray too far from your strengths. Sure, you'll solve short-term problems with your cash flow, but the cost may well be doing damage to your long-term chances of success. Build your skills the right way, not at a client's expense. If you want to get experience in a new area, first read as much as you can, or take a course or two to get up to speed. Once you have a good grasp of the subject, consider partnering on a project with someone who knows that field really well. This will ensure that the client gets a good product. You'll start gaining the hands-on experience you need, and everyone will be happy. Avoid projects that will make you yawn. Of course, there are boring bits and pieces to almost any assignment, and you just have to slog through them. But if the entire project promises to be tedious, you have 2 choices. First, you can turn down the project altogether. Ideally, you can recommend someone else better suited for the work. This helps the client, and also benefits the person you propose, who might very well send you a referral in return sometime down the road. Your other choice is to partner with a junior person who you can supervise as he or she does the tedious work, while you do the higher-level planning and execution. That should make everybody happy. You'll make less than if you took on the project alone, but you'll not be in danger of doing a less than optimum job because the work doesn't hold your interest. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. Focus and a real passion is key for you to be good at what you can offer to others. Howie Green. When I started out, I took any project just to get the cash flowing. But over the years, my work has developed a style that is uniquely my own, so now clients come to me wanting my style, which is much easier and much more satisfying. Pat Mullally. I learned the hard way not to take on a project I was not yet qualified to meet. So much of what I do involves technology and new programming. I've spent too many hours learning on the job at my own expense, when the smart move was to subcontract the work to experts who could do the work well. Chapter 7. Becoming Overconfident. Possibly one of the most important and humbling lessons I've learned about self-employment is that you can never let your guard down and ignore the need to keep on marketing. No matter how well your business is rolling along, you always need to have your eye on gaining that next new client. Don't make the mistake of becoming overconfident and thinking you can afford to let the hunt for new connections and prospects slide. Don't get me wrong. Confidence is a good thing, but overconfidence can be fatal. Make sure you're not overselling yourself on the idea that all your challenges are behind you and there's nothing but blue skies ahead. Be open to hearing input from people who have a solid basis for asking you tough questions, such as people who have experience in your field and who may be more alert to market shifts than you are. Reach out to a variety of advisors and listen carefully to what they have to say. Don't dismiss someone who urges caution as just being someone who is jealous of how well you're doing. Being passionate about your business is one thing. Being arrogant about it is another. Failing to learn the difference is something no self-employed person can afford. When things are going well and you're feeling really good about your business, it is very tempting to ease up on networking and the other activities you use to attract new business, especially if those activities cost money. But the truth is that client defections can happen at any time, often with little notice and for reasons completely beyond your control. A client can get sold to another company that has its own set of preferred vendors. A client can face cash flow problems that mean they have to cut your line item from their budget. A client can decide to hire someone in-house to handle the services you offer. Or the entire economy can tank and take some of your clients with it. This short list doesn't even begin to cover the endless possibilities that can cause you to lose clients unexpectedly. So let's say a big client does disappear. What are you to do? It takes time and money to gear up a marketing effort, and the worst possible situation in which to do this is when your cash flow has taken a hit through a client defection. Of course, some new business-generating activities, such as networking, aren't going to cost a fortune. However, it's harder to psych yourself up for the old meet-and-greet routine when your business is suddenly spiraling downward than it is when things are rolling along smoothly. Many of us don't enjoy networking to begin with, let alone having to put on that happy face when we're under the stress that goes with having a business setback. Steady marketing wins the day. Now, is it okay to scale back somewhat on the time and money you're devoting to your marketing when things are going swell? Of course it is. But don't ever completely stop those activities that keep you top of mind with business prospects. And always stay open to new opportunities that might pop up, because you never know when a bigger, better client might be right around the corner. Because I work in marketing, I know that self-employed individuals often do stop marketing altogether for long periods. I've had numerous conversations over the years with people who call me in a panic, wanting some instant public relations because they suddenly have to ratchet up their marketing after a setback. They tend to share that deer-in-the-headlights look. Trust me, you do not want to be that person. The bottom line, never stop looking for new business. Marketing must be a routine part of your work, even in the best of times. Take this advice to heart, and with luck, perhaps bad times will never come your way. Coping strategies. Take time to chat with new prospects who contact you. No matter how busy I am, I try to explore the needs of new prospects, especially if someone I know has referred them to me. First, if a friend or client has taken the time to give my name to someone, I owe them the courtesy of giving some attention to the person they referred. Secondly, even if you can't help the referred person yourself because your client dance card is just too full, perhaps you can refer them to someone else. Doing this kind of favor often pays dividends down the road when the person you refer the business to does you a similar good turn. Also, you just never know when you're really helping someone out. Once, a colleague to whom I'd referred a piece of business told me months later that at the time of the referral, he had been in a really bad spot business-wise, and my referral had meant the world to him. I can't tell you how good I felt knowing that I had helped someone like that. It was good karma. Have a marketing calendar. It's always a good practice to lay out your marketing for the next quarter, or even for the full year ahead of time. This exercise keeps you focused on marketing and will help hold you accountable to keeping your marketing effort rolling. Will you sometimes skip a planned activity because it just doesn't make sense to keep spending money on advertising, for example, when you've got work lined up for several months? Sure. But having an overall schedule that you check in with regularly will remind you that marketing cannot be ignored forever. Track what works and what doesn't work. There's no use spreading yourself thin by attending every single networking meeting or jumping in on every new social media tool that comes down the pike. This approach will soon lead to burnout and turn you off on marketing altogether. So make sure you're looking at the return on investment, both in terms of money and time spent. This will focus you on what's really worth the effort, especially when you're so busy with client work that you're tempted just to ditch marketing altogether for a while. Other voices. Barbara Rodriguez. Working from home is a big contributor to becoming complacent. You come to rely on just yourself. Over time, I've learned to understand the importance of brainstorming with others. Some of my best ideas have come from brainstorming. We all see the world through a different lens. This is why diversity is so important, both ethnical diversity and age diversity. Brainstorming and consulting with others also helps to keep your company fresh and up to date. I recently had to deal closely with a young woman from Spain and was impressed with how quick she was with social media and many of the new technologies that may not be a part of my generation's experience. I am clearly a digital immigrant, where she is clearly a digital native. Howie Green. I find that what I do is a humbling experience, so becoming overly confident is never going to happen. Life is a constant audition. Milton Glaser is one of the most successful and prominent graphic designers and artists of the past 100 years. I recently heard him say that he went into the office of a new client at the request of the company president to make a pitch for a new brand design project. The 20-something designer who met with him had no idea who he was and knew nothing of his work. So yeah, it's a humbling existence. Chapter 8. Core Elements of Your Success. Let's end this section by looking at the 3 core elements that you will rely on to succeed at self-employment. These are your core talents, your core values, and your core connections. By carefully considering these components before you become self-employed, you can leverage the power of the positive points you find and fill in any deficiencies you identify before you launch your new venture. This will help you get off on the right foot and also will help keep you there as the years go by. Core talents. Very few careers go exactly as planned. We get pushed this way and that by economic ups and downs, by bosses, both well-intentioned and not, by office politics, and by rapid changes in technology that suddenly make a once valued skill obsolete. All of these forces are beyond our control. That often is what finally drives many of us to self-employment. We're seeking a little control over our own destiny. There is one thing, however, that no bad economy, lousy boss, toxic workplace, or technology evolution can affect: your core talents. And it is these talents that will determine your success as a solopreneur. Alas, many people haven't even taken the time to analyze what their core talents are, and as a result, aren't prepared to communicate their value to would-be clients or customers. Of course, some of us know one or more of our core talents from an early age. For example, I knew from grade school that I could write. I always excelled at essay tests and never saw anything other than an A in English until 11th grade, when the boy I sat next to got more of my attention than the teacher did. This first ever B caused family tension, since the English teacher who gave it to me was my mother. My father was sure she was being too hard on me, lest she be accused of favoritism. Needless to say, I never told him about the cute boy. Anyway, I am certain that it came as no shock to anyone who knew me as a kid that I ended up as a writer. If you think back, I'm sure you'll acknowledge that at least one of your core talents was apparent from very early on. What was it? And will you be using that talent when you're self-employed? Will it, like my writing, be at the very heart of your business? If not, why won't it? Other core talents take more time to emerge. I was 40 before circumstances prompted me to realize that I wasn't just good at networking, I was darn good at it. This knowledge came to me only after I had made several successive moves to new areas where I knew not a soul, but had managed to integrate myself into the business community fairly quickly. What core talents have you discovered as your career has progressed? And how will you be leveraging those to move your new business forward? Here's the thing about core talents. No matter what ups and downs you face in your work life, your core talents don't go away or become less valuable. While the world I work in shifted mightily with the advent of the internet, my writing talent is no less valuable now than it was back when I was writing marketing brochures instead of website copy. If anything, it has become more valuable because the number of uses a client can have for this talent has increased. Sure, some of your skills or knowledge may become outdated due to technological advances, and you'll have to gain new knowledge and skills. But your core talents, those things that really and truly make you valuable to your customers or clients, don't change. Is one of your core talents problem solving? Or relationship building? Or maybe you have an innate ability to bring together disparate pieces of knowledge and ideas to create something totally new. In other words, to innovate. Whatever your core talents are, they should be the centerpiece of your new business. If they aren't, I believe you will find yourself frustrated, just as I was frustrated when I was working in a position in which I was spending more time managing people than I was writing. In that job, I was out of balance. Days would go by when I barely turned on my computer, let alone wrote anything more exciting than a memo. You need to write, my mind cried out to me. I'm not suggesting that if you become self-employed, you do not have to do things that are boring. We all do. No line of work is an endless series of joyous experiences day in and day out. But if you haven't identified your core talents and aren't focusing on them as you choose the type of business you want to have, I don't believe you actually will be successful. So gain control over your destiny, assess your core talents, and make them work for you. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. Another element that I often consider in what I do is the concept of intersections. I know what I am good at and what I like to do. I try to take two or more of these and bring them together in my work, or take my talents and combine them with an industry segment. For example, open innovation within the medical devices industry. Core values. The second essential component of your success will be your values. These are the rules you live by in conducting your business. Sadly, many people don't take time to consider what values they intend to operate their business under, and invariably, they're faced with business quandaries that require them to make a value-based choice. Every month in Entrepreneur magazine, an ethics columnist answers queries from readers who are not sure what to do about a given situation they're facing. Often, in reading these questions, I think the people posing them have never taken time to define their values because if they had, coming up with the right solution would be fairly easy for them. In the course of his work with companies around the world as an open innovation author, speaker, and advisor, my client, Stefan Lindegard, has asked many business people what their values are. He and I have had several interesting conversations about the fact that when he brings this topic up in workshops and seminars, most people do not have a ready answer. In other words, they haven't taken time to delineate what values drive them in their work lives, and by natural extension, in their lives outside of work as well. This lack of thought about values surprised me. Since I have a firm grip on my own core values, I took it for granted others did too. Since I started my business, I have tried to follow the values below. Check these out and see if they would work for you, and add any that you feel would help you do a better job for your clients or customers. For example, I don't have any employees. If you will have employees, you should define the values by which you will treat them. Be honest in every aspect of your dealing with clients. Always tell clients, and prospective clients, what you really think, not what you think they want to hear. If you're just going to parrot back to clients what they want to hear, and not what they need to hear, Save them some money and just shut up. Also, if something is outside your area of expertise, say so and offer to find someone who can help. Don't take work you are qualified for with the notion that you can do a quick study on the topic. Always do your best. In the writing game, it's easy to get tired and frustrated by the time you're on the fourth draft of a marketing brochure or a book chapter. But don't just start to mail it in. Get up every day committed to doing the best you're capable of doing that day. Be trustworthy. If you say you're going to do something, do it. On those rare occasions when you are going to miss a deadline, let the client know before, not after the fact, and be honest about the reason. Also, be absolutely scrupulous in your billing practices. Treat clients as you want them to treat you. Clients are more than just a check at the end of the month. They are people who have problems and bad days just like you. So don't take it personally if they're snippy or abrupt or not as responsive as you'd like. Don't take anything personally because it almost never is about you. It's about them and the totality of their lives, most of which you know little about. Be willing to listen. If a client wants to veer a conversation off into an area totally unrelated to your work, listen. You may be one of the few unbiased people in your client's business life, and sometimes people just need to vent, or sometimes they truly are looking for a second opinion. Whatever the case, be there for your clients. These values play out in a myriad of ways during the course of a given week. For example, I had a query not long ago from someone who was looking for an editor for his fiction book. It would have been easy for me to take on the project, but I've worked only with nonfiction. While as an avid fiction reader I could probably add some value to his work, I know there are other people far more qualified for the job. So since he was in Eastern Massachusetts, I pointed him in the direction of the Boston chapter of the National Writers Union, where I'm sure he can find someone to help him. Sure, there are people out there who would take on such an assignment, even if they'd never edited a fiction book before, just as I'm sure there are ghostwriters who tell people their weak book ideas are actually great, all in the interest of getting assignments and growing their income. But that's not me. So I ask again, what are your core values? Having these ideas clear in your mind will make it much easier to get through the average business day, because the right choice will become amazingly clear when you work in a values-centered way. As in the example I gave above, choosing what to do or not to do will become a breeze. And if you have employees, they also will need to know what your values are. For example, is one of your core values that the customer always comes first? If so, employees will need to know that, and they need to be empowered to take the right actions day in and day out to put that value into action. Other voices. Mark G. Auerbach is one of my co-bloggers at succeedinginsmallbusiness.com. He has been self-employed since 1987, specializing in nonprofit marketing and public relations. Based in Springfield, Massachusetts, Mark also reports on the local arts scene for a newspaper and on radio. Here is his advice on why acting with integrity and ethics is so vital. As a self-employed person, you are your product. If you behave with integrity and ethics, you'll be respected. If you tarnish your image by bad business practices, behavior, or stupidity, that's not quickly forgotten. I protect my public image. I've seen too many people make stupid moves that haunt them for the remainder of their careers. Howie Green. Most of my work has come to me because of a recommendation or due to my art and design style that people like. I work in a field where my work gets seen a lot, and that is my best advertising. However, keeping clients is another matter altogether. I always make sure that clients have a good time and a good experience working with me. And no matter what I'm going through, their experience is a good one. Like the actor on stage in a comedy who just experienced a tragedy in real life, the audience doesn't need to see your pain. Core connections. The third key component of your success will be your core connections. In every successful small business owner's life, there is someone who has reached out a helping hand at a critical moment. There is usually also someone who has been unfailingly supportive, always willing to listen when things are challenging and to cheer when great things happen. I call these people core connections. They are the people who truly have helped us achieve success. Your list of core connections will evolve over the course of your self-employment, but it is a good idea to start now by identifying the people you already know who will be able to support your success. The other thing you'll want to do is figure out how you can support them in return. I've had a handful of strong core connections over my career, people who constantly send me referrals or who are always willing to take time to provide good advice when I need it. These are people who ask me tough questions when needed and give me that reality check we sometimes all need. They point out my strengths when I am being too humble in a proposal. They listen and advise when disaster looms. In several cases, they are people who have offered to open their checkbook to tide me over a tough spot. Although I never had to take them up on those offers, it was very comforting to know that they cared enough to make such an offer. Do you have people who fit that description? I hope so. I could be wrong, but I think you will recognize a potential core connection fairly soon after you meet. I think it's almost like a separated at birth thing. You recognize someone who could be a true ally or a kindred spirit pretty quickly. At least that's how it has been for me. I hope it's the same for you. And I hope you already know who your core connections are, and you're holding them close. Self-employment is tough stuff in the best of times. And in the worst of times, like the Great Recession, you need grit, ingenuity, and a solid support system to make it through. I believe it's virtually impossible to truly go it alone. We all need someone who is looking out for our interests, or with whom we can be 100% honest when things are off kilter. For this reason, when you find your core connections, make sure they have plenty of reasons to feel about you the same way you feel about them, that they couldn't do it without you. Never become so busy that you don't take time to check in frequently with these people. These are relationships you simply can't afford to lose. They are the keys to your success, along with your talents and your values. The best thing about these relationships is that they inevitably end up being about so much more than just business. Part 2. Clients and Workloads. Chapter 9. Having too many eggs in one client basket. A few years ago, I was very worried about one of my friends, who I'll call Nancy, although that is not her real name. A freelance public relations consultant like me, at that time, her client roster included 2 small clients who gave her sporadic assignments and one very big client that consumed roughly 95% of her time and accounted for the same percentage of her income. This is a very dangerous situation for a self-employed public relations consultant because in our world, there are no guarantees. Even if you're doing a fabulous job, a client can suddenly dump you for reasons totally outside your control, and even some that are outside the client's control, like a faltering economy that tanks their business. I am always nervous when a new marketing person arrives at one of my clients because that often means they will want to bring in a new roster of vendors with whom they had previously worked. While things don't always turn out that way, it happens often enough for it to strike fear into your heart the instant you hear a client is hiring someone new who will oversee your relationship with the company. As an interesting aside, I've also lived through the scenario, several times in fact, where the new person coming in proved to be a disaster and was gone in short order. In each case, I immediately thought the client had made a bad choice. Each time I had to bite my tongue and not ask the question that was on my mind. What were you thinking when you hired this idiot? Instead, I quietly raised red flags with the head of the organization about specific incidents that did not make sense. In this way, I wasn't seen as just being someone who resented having a new boss at the client firm. I was raising legitimate issues that I knew would not make the company head happy. This worked because each time this happened, I had had a long-standing relationship with the company. They already knew I wasn't someone who made a lot of complaints or had a problem getting along with people. While I can't say for sure my red flags helped push the new person out the door in these two cases, I do believe they were a contributing factor. So I would encourage this approach if you find yourself in a similar situation. Directly questioning the wisdom of a newly made hire will probably raise resistance. In contrast, alerting the boss to specific problems is generally appreciated. If these alerts begin to pile up, the person who made the new hire will often realize the need to reconsider. Change can happen fast. Truth be told, the list of reasons why a client might defect is endless. Sometimes you have advance warning that things might go south, but oftentimes you don't. Which brings us back to Nancy's case. Several years into her relationship with the firm that was accounting for the vast share of her income, a much larger company suddenly acquired her client. In such a scenario, anything could have happened to her relationship with the firm. This event occurred over the course of one weekend with absolutely no hint ahead of time to Nancy, or to any of the client's dozens of employees for that matter, that a sale was in the works. Only the owner and his wife, who also worked in the business, knew of the impending sale. Nancy and I burned up the phone lines with conversations in which we discussed all the possible outcomes this sudden change might have for her. As it turned out, she was given a 6-month contract extension by the new owner, which actually increased the number of hours she was putting in on this client. So then she had even more eggs in this one basket. Then, at the end of the 6 months, Nancy was told that her services were no longer needed, which left her client roster in very sad shape and sent her scrambling to find new business. It had been a very good couple of years financially, but now the lean times were upon her. And given that at this point the country was in the midst of the Great Recession, lining up new business proved to be very hard. Having too many eggs in one basket, of course, is not just a problem for those of us who are self-employed. Manufacturing companies, for instance, can also face big problems if they become too heavily dependent upon one or two large customers. Without a good diversity of customers, it is all too easy for a business to be totally rocked by just one or two customer defections. Throughout my years of self-employment, I have tried to make sure I never had too many eggs in one basket. This can be hard to do, especially if one client is handing you more and more business, as in my friend's case. She certainly didn't start out working for them with the notion that they would become almost her sole client, but on the other hand, once she got really busy with them, she stopped pursuing other prospects. Ignoring the dangers of such a situation is very risky, and before you do likewise, I encourage you to consider the possible negative consequences. I believe having a diverse client or customer base is fundamental to long-term success, whether you're out here on your own like Nancy and me, or whether you're a larger business with employees who rely on you for their paychecks. So check your basket, and if too many of the eggs are from one client, see what you can do to change that situation. Coping strategies. Get it right from the start. Many people begin their freelance businesses already having one big client on their roster. In this common scenario, the sense of security that comes from knowing that you will be earning money from the get-go is what prompts people to finally make the leap into self-employment. This is fine, but don't linger in that seemingly comfortable spot for too long. Immediately start to make it a practice to devote significant time to activities designed to bring in new business. Keep track of where your money is coming from. I've always tried to have a handle on what percentage of my income is coming from each client. Once I was anywhere near a point where more than 40% came from any one client, I knew it was time to get serious about generating new clients. Of course, if your dance card is already full, the question becomes, how do you find time to do all the new business activities required to generate new clients, let alone do the work they will bring with them? The answer is that you need to have people you can offload work to. I've always had at least one subcontractor involved in my work. In the really good years, I've had as many as 3 subcontractors working on different projects. An alternative is to begin to hire employees and build a company. For my taste, this is not what I wanted to do because I didn't want the worry that comes from having to cut a salary check to someone each week. But you can gain many of the same benefits from just hiring subcontractors who are available when your plate becomes overfull. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. My coping strategy here is to work in different countries and continents. Although this is a global economy, some markets are always better or worse than others, and it has often helped me to do my business development in different regions of the world. Author note: Stefan is in Denmark and has been my client since 2008, so he's my example of doing business globally, all made possible by the Internet. March G. Auerbach. Always keep your client base diverse. Never have more than 50% of your business in one client or type of business. You can replace 10 to 20% of your client base easily, but when half or more is with one client, you face disaster if that relationship goes sour for any reason. Similarly, if you're overly dedicated to one industry and that industry hits a bad patch, you could be in trouble. Barbara Rodriguez. When we started out, we had too many eggs in one client basket. A good 50% of our income was coming from one large hospital. I realized early on that we had to try to make it a point to diversify. After a few years, I'm proud to say that if we lost that hospital, which we haven't, we would still be doing quite well and could easily replace them. This comes in time. In the meantime, you need to take very good care of that one customer and promise them the sun, moon, and the stars. My business interpreting and translation consists of all subcontractors except for office staff. We have over 300 contractors on the books. The problem is in finding quality subcontractors, and that we had to develop over time, trial, and error. As with any business, the people are the most difficult part, because you can't control their business ethics, their timeliness, and their quality. You have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince or princess. At the beginning, we worked with government contracts mostly for state agencies. It was a lot of work under 2 state contracts, but if 2 state contracts went under, I would go under. So I made it a priority to diversify my customer base. We started working with hospitals, clinics, lawyers, and public schools. When you build momentum and maintain a reputation for quality and affordable service, one customer tells another, and then you can play off those firmly established credentials and references. Howie Green. I had a great client who gave me hundreds of projects over a 17-year period. My contact was an old friend from a previous company where we worked together, so it was always an easy relationship. The work wasn't always the most creative, but it was steady and plentiful, so I got to depend on it. But I got blindsided. One day, I got the new issue of their corporate magazine in the mail, and it had been designed by someone else. I called my client, and not only did he not return my call, but I have never heard from him again. So yeah, don't put your eggs all in one basket. Chapter 10. When clients are unreasonable. No accurate depiction of the life of a self-employed person would be complete without a few examples of clients making completely unreasonable demands. Let me count the ways in which clients can be difficult. Unreasonable project timelines. Clients who expect you to turn projects around in an unreasonable time frame are more the norm than a rarity. Part of it is a lack of understanding of everything that goes into the work they're asking you to do. Never having done this work themselves, they think it's simple when it usually isn't. But another major cause of this is hideously poor planning on the client's part. Their emergency suddenly becomes yours. Some clients routinely set false deadlines. They say they absolutely must have something done by a certain date, but when you press them on why that date matters, it turns out there is no real reason behind it. It's one thing to make people jump through hoops to get, for example, a website update done prior to a major event your company is sponsoring, or before the launch date of a new product. It's another thing to demand that people perform miracles just because you think it would be nice to have a project finished before you go off with your kids for spring vacation. Yes, you might enjoy your vacation more if the project isn't on your mind, but pity your poor vendor who was unable to spend the previous 2 weekends with his or her family because your project had to be done without there being an actual business imperative behind the deadline. I've learned over the years that a certain portion of clients set short deadlines because they've been disappointed by freelancers or consultants in the past who weren't able to meet any deadlines that were set for them. Clients who have had such experiences just assume no one will ever actually meet a deadline, and so their strategy is to set extra early deadlines in the hope that the project will then possibly get done by the time they actually need it to be done. I've found that if you're able to meet a few deadlines for such people, they will be surprised and begin to set more reasonable timelines as you build trust with them. Also, under this category of unreasonableness, fall the people who constantly want their projects to jump to the head of the line. They can't believe you won't be able to start their work immediately. They apparently think you've just been sitting by your phone, waiting for them to call. This attitude is particularly irritating when it is a client you haven't heard from for months. It's unclear how they thought you were keeping your business afloat while they were gone. But now they're back, and they expect you to be so thrilled that you drop your more steady clients by the wayside and get to work on their project ASAP. Unreasonable budgets. Some people love driving a hard bargain when it comes to money. They pride themselves on being able to get work done cheaply and are even apt to brag about this. And if the scope of a job changes after a budget has been agreed on, they will not want to pay extra for the extra work. Such bargain hunters don't realize that by squeezing their vendors financially, they are pushing the good ones away. People with real skills and a proven track record aren't likely to put up with being nickeled and dimed to death on every single project. Note that there is often no relationship between bargain hunting clients and the size of their bank accounts. I have had clients who I knew were rolling in dough try to talk me down on a proposed project budget. You can argue that that kind of hard bargaining is how they got to be as rich as they are in the first place, which may well be true. But that doesn't justify, in my mind at least, trying to talk me into cutting my hourly rate or my projected project budget. Yes, you're reading me right. Such people irritate me to no end. Phone calls or texts at unreasonable hours. Having a home office has big benefits, but the downside is that some clients expect you to be accessible to them at all hours. They figure you're only a few steps away from your desk, so why wouldn't you be ready, willing, and able to go to your computer and read the document they've just emailed you, even though you're in the middle of cooking dinner? This situation has only gotten worse with cell phones and texting, which allow clients to reach you anywhere, anytime. I'm not an early riser during the week, let alone on the weekend, so one of the worst instances of violating all social norms that I experienced was having a client call at 7 a.m. on Saturday, as she and her husband were driving down to Cape Cod. She wanted to while away the drive by chatting about the book proposal we were writing together. She didn't even bother to ask if this was a good time to talk. When I wrote on my small business blog about red flags that a prospect might not make a good client, I heard from other people who have received calls at all hours of the night. One woman recounted being called after business hours on Christmas Eve. Everyone who is self-employed knows that it is not a 9-to-5 situation. I routinely conduct early morning or evening phone calls with clients. I once had a project that involved working with an executive in China that necessitated phone calls at midnight. Fortunately, I'm a night owl, so I was more wide awake for these calls than I was for the 7 a.m. Saturday call from the book proposal client. I'm also happy to talk on Saturday if needed, although Sunday is off limits. But these non-regular hours calls are arranged ahead of time, not spur of the moment. Clients who expect you to be available for their calls 24/7 are being disrespectful of your right to have a life outside of work. Clients can be unreasonable in many other ways, but these seem to be the three major categories that irritate consultants and other self-employed individuals. What follows are coping strategies that you should apply in the face of such irritations. Coping strategies. Set boundaries from the start and stick to them. Know how far you're willing to bend in the areas where problems are likely to arise. These boundaries may evolve over time and may even change from client to client. For example, if it's the early days of your solo career, you may be willing to bend further on price than if you're well established in business. Other variables include just how crazy the schedule is a client is asking for, or how much they're asking you to lower the budget. Trimming 10% here or there usually won't kill you, but if someone is truly bottom-feeding for the lowest possible price, then perhaps you should encourage them to look elsewhere. One of the boundaries I always make clear to clients is that I will not be reachable when I'm on vacation. What's the point of going away for much-needed R&R if you're constantly checking your cell phone? Seriously, they all can get along without you for a week. And if they truly can't for some reason, or if your vacation is going to be a more extended one, I hope you will have lined up colleagues who can hold down the fort while you're gone. Let the specific situation and client history guide your response. If a long-term client who has always been reasonable about the timeline or the budget suddenly finds themselves in a real bind around one of these issues, you may decide to help them out just this one time. But if a client habitually operates in crisis mode or is always trying to get a bargain price, you have to decide whether this client is actually worth having. Listen to the next coping strategy. And know this: doing a client a favor that ends up with you on the losing end of the financial bargain is unlikely to pay dividends in the future. All it will show is that you can be talked down on your price, so they will continue with this approach for each future project. Another factor that obviously comes into consideration is just how valuable the client is to your bottom line. I am willing to bend over backward much more for a client who is A, long-term, and B, provides interesting, lucrative work on a regular basis. The odd thing is, however, that I've noticed that the biggest pains in the butt are often the clients with short-term needs and whose project fees are not going to make a significant difference in my financial well-being. I've never been sure why this correlation exists, but it definitely does, and it's something for which you should be alert. For this reason, if I get any red flags when we first meet to discuss a project that the potential client is going to be more trouble than he or she is worth, I just use the old trick of pricing my proposal so high that they're unlikely to accept it. And if they do accept it, at least I'll be working at a price that will help make up for the frustration they'll undoubtedly cause. Do not hesitate to fire a client who repeatedly oversteps boundaries. Any client who regularly commits the types of sins discussed here, or any personal boundary that is important to you, such as someone who constantly makes inappropriate sexual comments or otherwise makes you feel uncomfortable, is not worth the distress they're putting you through. The frustration and negativity they generate will drain your energy. Even worse, their unreasonable demands may cause you to neglect other clients who aren't behaving badly. I know it can be hard to walk away from a paying client, but sometimes it truly is the wisest choice. Perhaps the worst thing that can happen when you continue to work for people who don't respect you and your skills is that you can begin to doubt your own abilities and your own right to set reasonable boundaries. Don't risk becoming a doormat for anyone. This can ruin your self-confidence and your ability to negotiate the types of deals you really deserve. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. Beware of what I call corporate beggars. Nowadays, even the big companies ask for free test runs, free tickets to conferences, or free sessions. They are not always ready to pay the real price and commit with their budgets. Mark G. Auerbach. I'm very clear with clients what my business hours are. I also accommodate the clients on the West Coast and Europe and build their time zones into my work plan. Even though the majority of my clients are on retainer, I let them know that I surcharge work assignments on evenings and weekends. I charge for travel and meeting times, and I bill for scheduled meetings that are canceled with less than 24 hours' notice. After working for a client an hour away who would set up a meeting and then text a cancellation 15 minutes before start time, I billed round-trip mileage and travel time. They quickly got the message. Barbara Rodriguez. We seem to live in a last-minute world. I'm quite obsessive about planning ahead, so it really drives me nuts when other people don't. I have resigned myself to this now being the new normal. One of the rules I live by is that if quality is going to suffer because of a last-minute request, I try to negotiate more time. If that's not possible, I refuse the job. I have seldom had to refuse a job. If you permit shoddy work to get out there and represent you in any way, it will come back to haunt you. You have to be assertive and make it clear that you will not sacrifice quality for speed of delivery. Howie Green. Yeah, setting expectations is a constant and ongoing task. Clients demand everything, and you have to be the one to tell them what's possible and not possible. It is not easy, but sometimes you have to say maybe or no when all they want to hear is yes. Figuring out how to do that is different with each client, depending upon the relationship. I had a rock and roll production company client, and our contact with them was a guy who screamed and yelled all the time about everything. He made my assistant cry several times until I explained that he deals with musicians all day long, so he has to scream or they won't listen to him. He was basically a really nice guy who had to deal with nutcases all day long. It took me a while to figure out how to say no to him in a way that didn't make him blow a mental gasket. Pat Mullally. I realized early on that some clients would always make unreasonable demands. Usually, this was because the clients were totally ignorant of what it took to make something happen. It was my job to educate them. When I broke the project down into its basic components, and then assigned time and cost to each, the client's eyes were opened, probably for the first time. I had no idea it took so long or cost so much, was a usual refrain. Being straightforward and honest about what was involved in making a project come together is the smartest way to avoid a crisis. Chapter 11. Fluctuating Workloads. Many times over my years in self-employment, I felt like a frustrated Goldilocks. My workload is either too light or too heavy, rarely just right. Such is the plight of the self-employed. You're either hyperventilating over how much work you have to get done, or feeling angst about how little work you have in the hopper. It's sometimes shocking how quickly you can swing between these two extremes. For example, when I've been toiling on a book manuscript for months, and it's finally on its way to the publisher, the sudden lull that ensues can be frightening. After months of telling people I'm way too busy and battling a deadline that is rapidly approaching, now I suddenly have days of nearly empty time yawning ahead of me. Time to crank up the new business machine again. The same is true of going from barely busy to frantically busy. With one phone call, a client can radically change my workload. And heaven forbid if two such phone calls come in during the same week, or even the same day, as has been known to happen. It feels like being in a car going from 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. Or something less. I'd like to be able to give some good advice about how to smooth out your workload so that it's always at a comfortable level, neither too much nor too little, but just right. But I haven't managed to do that for myself in close to 3 decades of freelancing, so I'm not sure I'm in a position to hand out coping strategies on this topic. Instead, let's talk about the two challenges, stress and time management, that come with fluctuating workloads, and which, oddly enough, are present both when you're overloaded with work and when you have insufficient work. All stressed out. It's ironic, isn't it, that you may lose sleep when you have too little work and when you have too much? Learning to keep this stress under control comes with experience. The first few times you're seriously overburdened with deadlines may cause a real freakout. But with time, you'll become more confident in your ability to get it all done. I remember the first time I was working simultaneously on 2 book manuscripts. I was really stressed and not at all sure I could get them both done by the publisher's deadlines. But I did. And so the next time this happened, I was less stressed because I had already proven to myself that it could be done. Although, to be honest, after the second time around with this, I vowed never, ever to take on 2 books at the same time. It falls into the category of, yeah, I could do that, but I really don't want to. When you're overly busy, one solution that helps is to subcontract work to colleagues. In the late 1990s, when I was doing only public relations and event management work, I often had 3 people at a time working for me as independent contractors. This relieved my stress, enabled me to take on larger clients and projects, and significantly increased my billings. Of course, selecting and managing subcontractors can add a different kind of stress to your business and isn't even a possibility in some fields. But if your profession lends itself to having subcontractors, this method can be a huge stress reliever and an income builder as long as you choose these people carefully. Similarly, once you've been through several periods when you wonder whether the phone will ever ring again with new business opportunities, you will learn what you need to do to get things back on track. This will usually involve networking, and yes, more networking. Of course, if you had been networking steadily all along, you may have been able to avoid having a real slowdown in business. But the natural tendency is to slow or even stop networking activities when business is really good. Despite being a huge believer in networking, I too have made this mistake a few times, always to my great regret. Too much or too little time. Time management, like stress, can be challenging both when you're too busy and, oddly, when you're not busy enough. Time management is an essential skill for the self-employed. When you're really busy, you have to know how to juggle the demands and deadlines of multiple clients, and this requires knowing how to make the most of every minute. As I already discussed in Chapter 4, without some time management techniques in your toolkit, you will be in danger of working night and day and losing all balance in your life. The other thing I can suggest is equally difficult to do. When your workload is threatening to overtake your life, learn to just say no. I know, it's really hard to turn down business or to ask if you can delay starting a project for a couple of weeks. But sometimes, for your sanity, and to ensure that you are able to perform at your best, that's a bullet you just have to bite. It took me at least a decade of self-employment before I could bring myself to turn down work. But each time I've done so, things have worked out for the better. Most clients are willing to be reasonable about such things, and if they truly value your services, they'll wait a little while to get them. The time management challenge when your workload is scanty is to keep your eye on the ball. This is particularly true if you work at home. It is all too easy for household chores to grab your attention when you're not overly busy with work. You may think that since you're not rushed with work, you can put the projects you do have off until tomorrow. This is a recipe for disaster. More often than not, your phone will ring tomorrow with a client who has a big urgent project, and now you'll be behind the 8 ball because you had been procrastinating. What you need to focus on during slow times is not painting the spare bedroom, but rather new business activities that will bring in more work. Seeking new business is the least favorite part of business for many people, so it is all too easy to delay such activities. But if you hope to get out of a slump, this is the only path. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. Fluctuation impacts flexibility. When you have done this long enough, you get a better sense of the ups and downs and how this will impact your workflow. I prefer to work with paying clients. No wonder, but I always have a long list of things to do that can help me bring in better business opportunities later. if there is a slow period. I write lots of blog posts, I visit with prospective clients and relevant contacts, and I try to learn new things and do lots of research. There are always too many things to do as an entrepreneur, or as a self-employed person. One of the key challenges is to choose what is the most relevant thing to spend your time on, while having both the short, mid, and long-term perspectives in mind. Barbara Rodriguez. At times it seems it's either feast or famine. This is another reason to diversify. Many businesses are seasonal, and you can expect to get work from them at certain times of the year. Our state contracts are busy year-round, although we keep our eyes open for certain local or national news that might require our services, such as the H1N1 virus. Suddenly, many school systems were calling us to translate flyers to send home to parents. Our school customers always scramble prior to the start of classes in September because they need their student handbooks translated and messages ready to send home to parents about the coming year. And, of course, everything is a rush and due yesterday. So when the work comes, we scramble to get it done, and it makes up for the times where work is slow. When I started the business, I used to worry that I'd get up one morning and none of my customers would call and that everything would just go down the tubes. It never happened. When things get slow, this is your opportunity to find new customers. At some point, you start feeling that the business has taken on a life of its own. If you provide reliable quality services, word can't help but get around. Our best customers have been referred by other longtime customers. At some point, you get to play off of what you already have. Say I'm going after another school customer. I let them know all the schools that we have been doing business with and how satisfied they are. I provide them with contact names, people they can call who are in the same business, who can attest to our good service and quality. Howie Green. I have found that consistently mid-July to mid-August are always the slowest weeks of the year. Then mid-August all hell breaks loose. I chalk this up to vacations and bad planning on my clients' part. They always push everything in the third quarter off until August, then panic and go crazy to get all their projects completed by Labor Day. And it doesn't seem to matter what kind of business they're in. The August panic is tried and true. Chapter 12. Clients who don't hold up their end of the bargain. Some years ago, a client who is also a long-term friend sent me an email asking for advice about how to handle an awkward situation. 10 days earlier, a new client of hers had signed a contract that stipulated that a down payment on my friend's work was due upon the signing of the contract. However, the client didn't bring a check with her and instead said it would be coming in a few days. Now, the client was sending my friend emails pushing her to begin the work they had agreed on, despite the fact that no check had arrived yet. When my friend asked about the payment, the client wrote back that because their company was very small, their bookkeeper was a part-timer, and thus the check hadn't been written yet. She said my friend's invoice was on the top of the pile, for when the bookkeeper did come into work later that week. My friend wanted my opinion on whether she should just go ahead and begin the work, even though the client had not lived up to her side of their written agreement. Anyone who is self-employed can share a similar story. People sign contracts and then renege on one of the terms of the agreement. But in our desire to get a new relationship off to a good start, we often let this slide, which is what my friend was considering doing. In my response to her, I suggested she not do that. I told her to stick by her guns about the upfront payment. I said, "We both know that if this CEO wants to get a check written, she can get it written today." My friend is a CPA, and although her practice now is not in the financial realm, she knew what I was saying was true even better than I did. So she wrote to the client and told her the contract stipulation that the first payment be made before work started was based on her experience in being burned by several nonprofits and startups in the past, and thus she was going to have to enforce the requirement in the contract the client had signed. The client replied, "Ouch, okay, now I understand," and the check was mailed immediately. My friend felt empowered, and I was glad I was there to help her see her way through a difficult situation. The takeaway. Here's the lesson to take from this example. If, in your desire to make a new client happy, you let that client walk all over you for no good reason, prepare yourself for more of the same as the relationship unfolds. Recognize that some clients have control issues. They like to be the ones in charge, and this can express itself in the type of behavior my friend's new client exhibited. In this case, the client's need to get a project started was all that mattered to her. The commitment she had made in the signed contract was a minor detail to her. Thus, she fed my friend the blarney about the bookkeeper. It wasn't that she didn't intend to eventually pay my friend. It's just that doing so was not high on her priority list until my friend stood her ground. Coping strategies. Set clear expectations at the outset. When you're working with first-time clients, this involves getting a signed contract that stipulates what both you and your new client expect of each other. This should cover deliverables, due dates, who is responsible for doing what, pricing and payment information, as well as any other information that is normal for your field to include in a contract. For example, when I ghostwrite a book, my contract stipulates that the person who is hiring me owns the copyright for the completed work. In those cases where I am to be included as a co-author, the contract stipulates that my name will be on the book cover and title page. Industry groups can give you guidance on what needs to be included in a contract. Of course, you'll probably end up using a variety of contracts to fit each particular situation. If I'm hired to perform a small job, I often just put together a one-page proposal that outlines all the pertinent information on the work to be done, deadlines, and payment. For a more involved project, such as ghostwriting a book, I use a much more detailed contract that follows recommended industry guidelines. Embrace your power. Too many times, people who are self-employed don't realize the power they hold in client relationships. In their desire to hold on to business, they back down when push comes to shove. It has always been my belief that in the long run, you won't succeed, and you certainly won't be very happy if you turn yourself into a doormat. In the example above, by setting a firm tone at the outset, my friend stood a far better chance of having this relationship be one in which she would be respected instead of walked on. Recognize when compromise is needed. If you're going to build long-term client relationships based on mutual respect and trust, you will find times when you need to compromise. Clients often have an understandable explanation for why they aren't living up to a commitment they've made to you. Rely on clear and open communications to sort things out. Discuss problems that arise openly and honestly, making it clear what the client's failure to meet the conditions set forth in your initial agreement means to the future of the project. For instance, if a client is not meeting their own deadlines for getting approvals back to you so that you can move forward to the next project phase, present them with a revised schedule that shows the impact their delays will have on the project's completion date. Sure, you might be able to make up some time and keep things on track, but you can't be expected to overcome repeated delays and still complete the project by the deadline you both agreed to at the start. Again, this is about taking the power that you have, instead of just folding like a house of cards when faced with clients who are not living up to their end of the bargain. Clients who are reneging on financial commitments are clearly tricky and require a whole different set of coping skills. Refer to the chapter on deadbeat clients in Part 3 for advice on how to handle such situations. Chapter 13. Handling Competing Client Crises. Some months ago, I arrived at my desk one morning to find that two clients both had projects that were on fire. By this I mean they both needed my immediate help composing important communications, one to employees and the other to the press. While I had known that the events that precipitated these needs were in the offing, there had been no way to predict that they would occur simultaneously. This is not the first time, and likely won't be the last, that I've faced competing client crises. Anyone who has been self-employed for any length of time is bound to run into such situations. Your stress level immediately soars as you try to plot out the best plan of attack, because the very last thing you ever want to do is disappoint a client at a time when they are counting on you to come through for them in an important situation. These questions go through your mind. Is it possible to get both things done in the time frame allotted? How should I prioritize the work? Might I need to call on a colleague for assistance? If so, what's the best way to divide up the work? And of course, you have to consider whether the crisis is for real, or is the client just being overly demanding and creating a crisis when one really doesn't exist, which happens more often than you'd think. In the particular situation I faced, neither client was being unreasonable. One client really did have major company news to share with employees and needed to have a message written up in time to get photocopied and stuffed in the payroll envelopes that would be given out the following morning. And the other client, a nonprofit, had promised to issue a press release by noon to coincide with a big announcement coming from the White House. Yes, that White House, the one at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. Believe me, opportunities to toss the White House into the headline of your press release don't come along every day, so you want to take advantage of it when you can. Fortunately, in this instance, I was well prepared to complete these projects, having done significant prep work already. Both jobs got done on time, and my blood pressure returned to normal levels. Uncontrollable outside forces. But there have been times when competing client crises have occurred that weren't so readily resolved. Often this happens when a crisis is caused from uncontrollable forces outside a client's organization, so they, and you, have absolutely no heads up in advance that something big is about to occur. For example, one of my former clients was a small community savings bank. Several times during the 5 or so years that I handled their public relations, I got phone calls about branch robberies that had just occurred. At these times, they needed a press statement made ready immediately. One of these calls came when I was in the midst of a crisis for another client. Major juggling ensued. If you're the type of person who is easily rattled by having to deal with one crisis, let alone two, this is something you should consider before making the leap into self-employment. If you're used to working in the corporate world, this may be a totally new situation for you, since in big companies, you usually can rely on having a team of people who can jump in to help at such times. This leads to the first of the coping strategies below. Coping strategies. Have backup help if possible. When you're a solopreneur, handling multiple crises simultaneously is very challenging. Consider developing a relationship with someone else in a similar position so that you can rely on each other for help in such situations. Carol Savage, one of the other voices you heard in this book, and I have been each other's backstop for decades now. We're each there for the other when one of us is feeling overwhelmed by a client crisis or by competing client crises. Learn to tell a fake crisis from the real thing. It is important to recognize that not everything that a client claims as a crisis is an actual emergency. Yes, some events, such as bank robberies at my clients' bank branches, do require immediate action. But I've also had clients call who are all in a panic about a crisis that was an emergency only in their heads. Be sure you understand the realities of the situation before you decide to give one situation priority over another. For example, I've had more than one client call and say they suddenly want work delivered ASAP that wasn't due for several days. Further discussion reveals that this so-called crisis is being caused by the fact that they've decided to go out of town for a few days and they'd like to be able to read whatever project we're working on while they're on the plane. Their need for reading material for a plane trip does not mean I should drop everything I'm doing and get their work done days early, something I have had to gently but firmly convey to them. No doubt you'll run into your own version of fake crises. As you get to know clients better, you will soon learn who is apt to cry wolf over nothing And who only labels something a crisis that actually is a crisis? Personally, after several fake emergencies, I'm always tempted to fire the client who repeatedly cries wolf. Be sure you always have good ongoing client communication, which will help prepare you for crises. As mentioned regarding the double crisis situation I talked about earlier in this chapter, it helped me greatly that I had already done significant prep work for the two clients involved. This was possible because I try to maintain a good flow of communication with clients so that I know what's coming up on their agendas. With one of these clients, I participated in weekly marketing conference calls, which were hugely helpful in enabling me to anticipate their upcoming needs. Will you sometimes be caught completely unaware by a client crisis? Sure. But if you work to stay in touch to the degree possible without making yourself an annoyance, you're more likely to be kept in the loop and will then be prepared to respond well. Stay calm when under fire. Be prepared to react effectively when clients are competing for your time. It isn't always a crisis. Sometimes it is just people wanting 100% of your attention and not being willing to acknowledge that they are not your only client. Working out how to juggle these kinds of demands is a huge part of being successful at self-employment. Keeping everyone happy without suffering from burnout or so much stress that it affects your well-being is your goal. Other voices. Howie Green. My clients don't want to know that I have other clients. They are the only ones, so I never, ever mention other clients. If time crunches happen, I tend to use family or personal reasons for rearranging my schedule because clients understand these kinds of demands. Chapter 14. Sudden, unexpected client defections. During the Great Recession, I lost two clients that I had been working with for several years. One was a business incubator whose funding came from the state. When tax revenues plummeted, they had to stop publishing the quarterly newsletter I had been writing for them for the past 3 years. The other client was an investment banking firm. When the mergers and acquisitions market dried up in 2008, they could no longer afford to have me write their press releases or the monthly white papers we had started 4 years earlier. Given the economic mess the country was in, both of these developments were foreseeable, and I wasn't surprised at all when I got the news. All self-employed individuals, however, experience client defections that come out of left field. In my line of work, a new marketing director will come in and decide to clean house, replacing current freelancers with ones he or she has worked with in the past, or perhaps building their staff so that the work can be done in-house. Or a client may decide they need to take things in a new direction, one of the most disheartening phrases a freelancer can hear. Aside from whatever else it may mean, the bottom line is that you're out and someone else is in. Such things are part and parcel of the self-employed life. I count myself lucky that I've faced relatively few such surprises. In fact, in several instances, I outlasted new marketing directors who vowed to shake things up and was still around long after the new faces had left the building. I always took pride in having long-term relationships with clients, and indeed, I've had clients with whom I've worked for well over a decade, a lifetime in my line of work. A blow out of left field. That's why a completely unexpected defection came as such a jolt to me in 2011. My oldest client, a company I had worked with literally from the first day I began my business in 1989, decided in January of 2011 to ban the use of freelancers. It was not an unreasonable decision, given how hard it was for them to drum up new business in an economy that was still struggling. Better to stop using freelancers than lay off staff. But guess what? They didn't tell me for months. Not having assignments from this client for 2 or 3 months in a row was not unusual. Such a lull would then usually be followed by a flurry of work over several months. So I didn't think anything of it when I didn't hear from them in January, February, or March. Although the work was somewhat sporadic, I had been able to rely on this client for thousands of dollars of business each year, through good times and bad, over 2 decades. In April, the company's owner and I had one of our periodic dinners, and she casually revealed the no freelancer decision that had been made by the employee she had promoted to COO in January. Gosh, I thought. It would have been nice to get some advance notice so that I would know I needed to gear up the new business machine to replace this significant piece of my business. As it turned out, I was able to replace their business, but by the time the news reached me that I needed to do so, I had wasted several months, during which I should have been seeking new clients. The lesson here is that if you're going to be self-employed, you need to be aware that no matter how close you've been to their organization or how long you've worked together, clients often do not consider the impact of their decisions on you or take you into their confidence when making decisions that negatively affect you. In short, you may feel like you're part of the family, but you're really not. Never take anything for granted when you're self-employed. Just because a company has hired you consistently for 21 years doesn't mean they'll be there for you in year 22. Coping strategies. Keep your ear to the ground for rumblings of client financial problems. Pay close attention to what is happening with your clients' businesses. Even in good economic times, some companies struggle. Once, a retail company that my colleague Carol Savage and I were doing public relations for declared bankruptcy. For many freelancers, this would have been bad news, especially if it left you hanging with an unpaid invoice or two. In the short term, this development actually meant more work for us because a lot of PR and employee communications needed to be done surrounding the bankruptcy, and this was an expense allowed by the bankruptcy judge. So while we did eventually lose the client, we didn't lose money and actually had a bump in our billings during the bankruptcy. We were fortunate, but that certainly is not the case with all self-employed people who are performing work for or selling goods to a company that goes belly up. The last thing you want to do is become just another unsecured creditor in a bankruptcy case. So always be alert for signals that all might not be well financially with your clients. If you get an inkling that the company is on shaky financial ground, you have 2 choices. 1. Have a heart-to-heart talk with your client and see if you can come up with a way to protect your financial interests while continuing to service the client. For instance, when a client I'd worked with off and on for some time suddenly started paying my invoices 30 or more days late, we shifted to a flat fee paid in advance approach that served us both better. I no longer had to make nagging phone calls asking for payment, and they no longer had to make excuses about why they hadn't paid as promised. We both felt better. This new approach, of course, required that I be able to calculate the hours a project would require in order to set a flat fee that would be paid in advance. The risk here was that I would underestimate the hours needed, but as far as I was concerned, this was offset by the benefit of having the money paid up front, rather than waiting 60 to 90 days for it. Plus, the fact is that if you've been doing something for a good while, as I have, you are probably pretty good at figuring out the required hours. 2. Wind down your involvement with the client and find replacement income. Sometimes the handwriting on the wall becomes so clear that you're better off getting out while the getting is good. I realize this may be easier said than done, depending on your line of work and how involved you are with the client's operation. Your odds of walking away with all that you are owed depends greatly on the client's ethics, their actual ability to pay, and how dogged you wish to be in collecting. Also, be alert for signs of other imminent changes that may affect your business with the client. Financial difficulties are not the only reason behind unexpected client defections. As I mentioned earlier, a new executive may be hired who wants to shake things up by bringing in new vendors, or, as was the case with one of my longest-running clients, the client may decide on a lifestyle change that means they'll be cutting back in some areas of their business. In my case, the client ran a consulting firm and wanted to scale back her involvement so that she could devote time to her growing interest in painting. She brought on a younger partner in the hope that this person would take over the marketing, which included managing my work. For a number of reasons, this plan didn't work out, and they eventually stopped the marketing activities in which I had been involved for well over a decade. Because I was well aware of the founder's desire to slow down and of the issues she subsequently was having with getting the new partner to pick up the slack, this was not exactly an unexpected defection, but it is just one more example of the wide variety of reasons why you might lose a client, even after years of working together. When clients start talking about their desire for change, listen carefully for signs that this desire is turning into a reality that might affect your business relationship with them. Bear in mind that clients won't tell you everything. Because of the nature of my work, clients do tend to tell me more than they perhaps do other vendors. After all, I am the one who has to write the press releases when big news, good or bad, occurs. However, this doesn't mean that I've always had an inside track on big developments, such as the sale of the company, and neither will you. When a sale is pending, most company owners will keep it very close to the vest, with very few people in the know. So you may be blindsided from time to time by big news like this. Not that all sales mean you're going to be out of the picture, because you may be able to make a connection with the new owner and continue on with the relationship. Just don't plan on this happening. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. Keep developing your abilities and stay sharp so that you can apply your skills in different ways. Here is where the idea of thinking in terms of intersections could work. Listen to Stefan's comments in Chapter 8. If possible, work in different world regions. If some are down, others seem to do better. Barbara Rodriguez. Some businesses do better in a bad economy. That was the case with our business when the economy soured in 2008, and it was directly related to working with state agencies. In a bad economy, more people apply for services such as unemployment, so we provided interpreters for unemployment hearings. The same with disability applications, which also tend to increase in bad economic times. We provided interpreters for disability evaluations with doctors and psychiatrists. Howie Green. One of the realities of my world is that clients come and go like a revolving door. Some stick around for one project and some for years, so you always need to be prospecting for new clients. Always. Pat Mullally. Once in a great while, I've had a client with whom I've worked for years suddenly find a new designer. It's happened when there was a change in top personnel. My contact at a company was leaving for a similar position in a new company. Knowing their replacement was likely to bring in his or her own people, I asked for a meeting so that I could be introduced to the new person and make my pitch. I also let my contact know how much I enjoyed working with them and would appreciate any work from their new company. Then I started looking for a new client. Chapter 15. When vendors let you down. Many of us who are self-employed routinely are involved with other vendors who are needed to complete various aspects of client projects. Sometimes these vendors are people we recommend to our client, who then pays the vendor directly. Other times, you may bring in these vendors as part of your team. Their work is included in your invoices, and you then pay them once you are paid. Or you may end up working with a vendor you know nothing about, who has been hired directly by the client. No matter what the scenario, if a vendor delivers subpar work for a project you are managing, you may be in for a world of hurt. For instance, I frequently recommend graphic designers to my clients. Those designers, in turn, hire printers to complete print projects we've worked on together. Having recommended someone or hired them on behalf of your client, if they don't perform up to your standards, it is your reputation and your relationship with the client that is on the line. In some cases, you may even be financially liable if a vendor does not perform well. This makes it very important to carefully vet any vendor you recommend or hire to work on a project. I make it a practice to work only with vendors I've known for a long time or who come highly recommended by a very trusted colleague. I have usually ended up regretting it the few times I veered from this policy, so the longer I've been in business, the harder it has become for a new-to-me vendor to get added to the list of people I recommend or hire on behalf of a client. Be wary of low-priced bidders. Once in a while, you may have to hire someone who works in a field in which you don't have trusted vendors. In such cases, it can be tempting to solicit bids from vendors and then just go with the lowest price. Before doing so, I recommend doing some homework first, such as getting references for each vendor from several of their clients. To lessen the chance of having problems later on, I urge you to put far more emphasis on these reference checks than you do on pricing. Sure, you want to save your clients money if you can, but if it comes at the expense of good work, it won't be worth the savings, nor the damage it will do to your client relationship if you bring in someone who can't deliver good work. Here's an example of why I urge you to rely more on references than on pricing when hiring vendors for your client. Several years ago, I served on a Chamber of Commerce committee that sought to hire a new printer for its newsletter. I volunteered to get cost proposals from 3 printers that belonged to the Chamber, and to call 2 or 3 customers for each vendor to check out their performance. One printing company got some of the most glowing references I had ever heard, but its price was not the lowest. Lo and behold, the Chamber director decided to go against the committee's advice and hired the lowest bidder, despite the fact that the clients of this printer with whom I spoke had given very lukewarm endorsements. The director soon reported problems with the new printer delivering the newsletter on time. Maybe she was shocked, but I sure wasn't. In this instance, I was very glad this hadn't been one of my clients who opted for the low-cost option and ignored negative information on the printer's work quality and ability to meet deadlines. But I have had cases in which a client insisted on using a vendor that I thought might not be up to doing the job. Also, you may find yourself working with subpar vendors who have a pre-existing relationship with a client. If either of these situations comes your way, I hope the coping strategies below will be of help. Coping strategies. Carefully document problems with vendors. This is especially important if you're working with a vendor you don't know, but who has a long-standing relationship with your client. At some point, you may need this documentation to track the project's progress in case there is a problem, or the documentation will support your recommendation that the client should seek a new vendor for future projects. Do not take it for granted that a vendor you've worked with previously will always do a great job. It's important to stay informed of the progress a vendor is making on a project you're working on together, and to speak up quickly if something seems to be going awry. This is particularly important if it is a vendor you've brought onto the job. After all, it is your reputation on the line just as much as theirs. A few years ago, a graphic designer and I were working on a project for a mutual friend who had worked with both of us off and on for over 20 years. In this case, the designer had begun work on the project before I was brought on board, and so I was not guiding her work. Much to the surprise of the client and me, it soon became clear that the designer was making errors that were seriously delaying the project. Because the relationship with the designer had been so long and so positive previously, the client delayed talking to the designer about her concerns until the list of problems had gotten very long. The main lesson to be learned from this example is this. When a vendor relationship starts to go off the tracks, it is best to find out why, ASAP, and to then take the business elsewhere if a solution isn't apparent. This is true whether the client is responsible for hiring the vendor or you are. Make the best of a bad situation if you must work with a vendor you don't respect. There may come a time when a client chooses to pair you with a vendor that you don't think is the best choice. Clients choose vendors for many reasons that aren't related to their capabilities. For instance, I once had to work with a very inexperienced website designer who happened to be the nephew of my client. The ink was barely dry on the kid's high school diploma, for heaven's sakes. All I could do was grit my teeth and try to move the project forward. It's important to understand that clients often have no real idea of what qualifications a vendor should have for a particular job, so they go with a friend or relative because that feels comfortable to them. If this decision is made without your input, you must live with the consequences, which often include having to try as best as you can to steer the vendor in the right direction, and of course, apply the first coping strategy above in case an opportunity does present itself down the road to recommend a different, better vendor to your client. Consider whether professional liability insurance is worth your while. Commonly referred to as errors and omissions insurance, this type of insurance protects service providers from mistakes that harm a client financially. There are special policies written for a wide variety of industries. Check to see what type of insurance is available for your particular field and assess whether you might need such coverage. What you need to determine is how much risk is really involved in what you're doing in comparison to the cost of the insurance. If something goes wrong on a project involving multiple vendors, such as a copywriter, a graphic designer, and a printer, the client may want to reach into the pocket of everyone involved for reimbursement, regardless of whether it was you who was actually involved in causing the error. Having insurance at such times would be a big help. Other voices. Howie Green. After years of having vendors screw up jobs and cost me money, I started demanding that my clients use their own vendors. Every one of them preferred to do that, which was a huge relief. They save money, and they are responsible for the vendor relationship, not me. Pat Mullally. I've been very lucky to work with some wonderful vendors. There have been a few losers in the bunch, but most have done great work. Depending on the project, I often recommend qualified vendors. But if a client wants to use someone of their own choosing, it's no problem. I make it clear the responsibility for the decision is theirs. I do my best to work with a vendor, but if things go south, it's not on my head. Chapter 16. Self-employment lessons I learned from my father. All this talk about issues that can arise with clients can be stress-inducing, so let's relax a bit and take a trip down memory lane. My memory lane, that is. I grew up with a model of self-employment, right in my own home from my earliest days. My father operated a small sawmill in Pennsylvania. He managed to survive without any business training beyond having watched his own dad, who also ran a sawmill. My father did this in an industry that was often hard hit by economic downturns and in which snow-filled winters forced him to shut down for months at a time. From our little out-of-the-way, rural location in south-central Pennsylvania, he developed a diversified clientele, selling lumber to everybody from the Pennsylvania Railroad, which needed a steady stream of railroad ties, to Amish buggy makers in Lancaster County, who were very particular about their lumber, by the way. They bought only the highest grade, to local people who needed a dump truck load of wood to heat their homes through the winter. Since my father conducted the business end of his operation from our home, I frequently heard him on the phone negotiating a deal, either to sell lumber or to buy his next stand of timber. And when I was in my early teens, he started having me write out the payroll checks each Friday. Both of these were good exposure to the intricacies of being your own boss. Here are my takeaways from watching him operate that have served me well while operating my own business. Do something you love. The work my father did was dirty, hard, and dangerous. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, logging is the second most dangerous occupation in America. Fishing is the most dangerous job. With his well-being and that of his workers on the line out there in the woods every day, it was a good thing he loved what he did. Even as a kid, I could tell how much Dad loved being out in the woods and cherished finding good timber to buy. Cherry was his favorite wood, and you could see the excitement in his face when he got his hands on furniture-grade cherry logs. I had friends whose fathers had 9-to-5 types of jobs that you could tell didn't excite them. Even as a child, I could tell there was a difference between my father's passion for his work and what my pals' dads were doing to earn a living. I feel fortunate to have a skill, writing, that I feel equally passionate about, that has enabled me to be my own boss and earn a decent living. Do the right thing. If you wanted to see smoke come out of my father's ears, all you had to do was say the words, clear cutting. This method of taking down nearly every tree on the side of a mountain was an anathema to him. I received a lecture on the topic any time we drove past a site where some big lumber company had clear-cut a patch of mountain land. He believed that cutting down only mature trees and leaving the younger trees with room to grow was far better for the long-term health of the ecosystem, although certainly Dad never used a fancy word like ecosystem. The lesson I took from this was that there was a right way to go about doing business and a wrong way. And if I'm ever tempted to take a shortcut, no pun intended, all I have to do is remember Dad's rants against the clear-cutters. Treat your small customers just as well as you treat the big ones. Whether someone was coming to Dad to buy a few boards to fix their back steps, or they were in the market for truckloads of lumber, my father treated everyone the same. He didn't kowtow to the big guys, and he didn't act like the small folks' business wasn't important to him. This is an attitude that I've practiced throughout my career, and it has served me well. I've had small clients turn into big ones, and they've stuck with me even though they could afford to go with a larger firm. Diversify, diversify, diversify. As I mentioned, my father sold his lumber to a wide variety of people in many different industries. This certainly helped him weather the ups and downs of the lumber market, which depends on many different factors. For example, although he did not sell to the housing industry, when the housing market tanked, all lumber prices would plummet. What I took from this was to not depend on any one industry for your livelihood. I have seen other people in my field cluster their clients in one industry only to face dire straits when that industry collapsed. Think real estate, or the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s. I'm glad my father taught me better. These are just a few of the business lessons I learned from observing my father. He passed away 2 years before I started my own business, but I know he would be proud that the lessons I learned from observing him have helped me survive for more than 28 years of self-employment. Other voices. Howie Green. My dad was a sales guy and always had a home office. Since we only had one phone, when it rang, it was often one of his clients, so we were raised from babies that you do not, under any circumstances, goof around on the phone. When you answer, be polite and professional, speak clearly, and take messages. Great advice for phone or email behavior. You never know who could be calling. Part 3. Financial Expectations. Chapter 17. Being financially self-sufficient. My self-employed friends are about equally divided between those who are married and those who are single. When tough economic times hit, as they did in the Great Recession, I worry a lot more about the single ones than the married ones, because being single and self-employed means that, financially speaking, you're out there on the high wire without a net. Unless, of course, you've had the good fortune of being a trust fund baby. If your business starts to fall off, you better hope you've managed to stash away plenty of savings, or that things turn around pronto, and that you haven't already maxed out your credit cards. I got married for the first time just 3 years ago, so I know exactly how hard and how scary it can be to be totally on your own financially. This may sound harsh, but when one of my self-employed friends who is part of a 2-income household frets about his or her business being slow, or a client not paying on time, I say all the appropriate, commiserating things, all the while thinking, you think you're worried now? Try being totally on your own, financially speaking, and see how worried you get when those unpaid bills stack up. Is this really for you? The reality is that being single and self-employed means you don't have a financial fallback, a situation that definitely isn't for everyone. If you fret about money a lot, even when you have a steady, secure job, The stress over finances you'll experience when self-employed is likely to be considerably greater. For this reason, I caution any single person who is thinking of making the leap from employee to self-employment to consider the financial implications carefully. Of course, no job is totally secure in today's economy, but at least if you get laid off, you can collect unemployment. If an unmarried self-employed person's business takes a nosedive, no government program is going to lend them a hand, unless, heaven forbid, they get to the point where they qualify for food stamps. None of this, of course, is to say that married people who are self-employed are immune to concerns about money. They, too, have their share of bills to pay and can be beset by worry if their business starts to slide. This means they, too, have to think about how much financial pressure they can handle before deciding to go into business on their own. The advice I have to offer you here is less about coping strategies and more in the way of advice of what you need to consider before making the decision to quit your day job and try to go it on your own, especially if you are single and have no financial plan B. Build up your financial reserves first. It takes time to build a successful business and the income that comes with it. If feasible, moonlight for a while and set that income aside to help you when you're out on your own. Make sure you've done all your homework in terms of fully understanding how long it will take you to build up a clientele. Now is not the time to be wearing rose-colored glasses, that's for sure. Be realistic. Test your idea with advisors and mentors you truly trust. Know the market rates for what you're offering. If you're going to be offering a service, thoroughly research what the going rates are for that service. Calculate how many billable hours you're likely to have per week, and then see how the resulting income matches with what you need to pay your bills. Be conservative in your estimates of how many billable hours you're likely to have for the first year or two of your business. Recognize that you'll have to spend a significant amount of time on non-billable duties, such as finding prospective customers and perhaps writing proposals, to name only some time-consuming activities. Any estimate that has you billing the major portion of your day, especially early on, is probably out of whack. In your calculations of needed income, don't overlook the fact that once you're self-employed, you will be paying the full freight in Social Security and Medicare taxes. This is a killer. Even after close to 30 years of self-employment, I am still shocked every year when I look at the line on my tax form that represents what I'm paying in terms of the self-employment tax. Listen for more on this in Chapter 19. Again, I'm not saying you should not give being your own boss a shot if you're single. Many, many single people do fine without a financial backstop. Before I married in 2015, I made it through 27 years and 3 recessions and always paid the mortgage on time. But I am pointing out the things that might trip you up if you don't plan carefully and realistically. My hope is that by having this information, you'll make the decision that is right for you. Other voices. Howie Green. Well, I'm an artist, so financial stability has always been an elusive dream, and one I was never that freaked out about. Besides, I always have my trusty accountant at my side, just a screaming phone call away. Chapter 18. Saving for Retirement. Poll after poll shows that a high portion of baby boomers have little or no faith they'll have enough money to retire when their careers end. Most experts believe they have a right to be worried. For one group of baby boomers, the self-employed, accumulating retirement savings is particularly challenging. When you're out here on your own, nobody but you is contributing to your retirement nest egg. I have spent over half my career working for myself. When you're self-employed, you pay the full freight on Social Security and Medicare taxes. No doubt Social Security will be a key part of your retirement income. But paying the full tax yourself, instead of having an employer pay half for you, leaves you with less income. At current tax rates, just under 8% less. to invest in IRAs and other retirement accounts, many of which will hopefully earn more than your investment in Social Security does. That's a significant amount of money year in and year out. This difference alone adds up over the decades, believe me. Also, no employer is contributing to a 401k for you. This can be extremely challenging, especially in years when your income is down due to a poor economy or any one of the many other factors that can cause your income to fluctuate from year to year. Financial experts, many of whom no doubt are safely employed by someone and aren't paying their own full Social Security tax, always advise making saving for retirement your highest priority. They tell you that the first thing you should do with every client check that comes in is first set part of it aside for retirement. Talk about a classic case of easier said than done. I don't know anyone who is self-employed who doesn't have cash flow ups and downs, and naturally, when it comes to deciding whether to pay the mortgage or sending money to your IRA, guess which choice most people make? We always think, oh well, I can make up that IRA payment next month. But then next month comes and more tough choices need to be made. Second-guessing one's choices. The amount of discipline required to get this right is enormous. Some days I wonder if I made the right choice. Wouldn't I have been better off working for someone else? Perhaps one of the large corporations I used to work for? According to most studies, I have saved over 3 times more for retirement than the average for my age group. But that is far from comforting, given how shockingly low and inadequate the average amount of savings is. And even though I'm better off than many people, my retirement savings are nowhere near the amount the experts say you should have socked away. In the 1970s, I worked for a major life insurance company for nearly 8 years and was partially vested in their pension plan when I left. When I reached 65, they began sending me a pension check for $78.82 each month. I sometimes reflect on how much bigger that check would be if I had stayed there for a few more decades. My best friend at that company was hired just a month or 2 before I was. She retired a couple years ago after spending more than 30 years there. I imagine she has absolutely no worries about having enough income for her retirement years. Yet, I also recall, as I mentioned early in this book, that other friends in Boston spent decades with Polaroid, only to have the money they had saved for retirement in the employee stock ownership plan made worthless when the company went bankrupt in 2001. Starting over again at age 50 or so, as some of these people had to do, must have been enormously scary. It's stories like these that show what a crapshoot the whole thing is. Who, after all, would have predicted that a company like Polaroid would go broke and leave its employees high and dry? So when I reflect on that, it makes me glad that at least my fate is more or less in my own hands. Coping strategies. Get good advice regarding the retirement account options available to the self-employed. The good news is that you have options beyond a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. For example, you can set up what is called a Simplified Employee Pension, or SEP, which allow you to contribute 25% of your net earnings up to a limit that is periodically adjusted by the IRS. Deciding which type of accounts, or which combination of accounts, since you can have several at the same time, is something I'd urge you to discuss with an experienced financial planner. A financial planner can also create a plan to set a retirement savings goal and tell you how much you need to put aside each month to achieve that goal. This can be a great motivator because without having such a goal in mind, you may underestimate or overestimate what you need to save. Start saving as early as possible. The sooner you start saving once you become self-employed, the easier it is to develop the habit and the better off you'll be when retirement time rolls around. This is especially true if you begin self-employment early in your working years. Even a small amount of money set aside each month beginning in your 20s and 30s can add up to a cozy nest egg by the time retirement rolls around. Delay taking Social Security for as long as you can. It may be tempting to sign up to receive Social Security at the earliest possible time, currently age 62, but this is foolish unless you have no other financial option. For each year you delay taking payments past age 62, the amount you will receive goes up between 7 and 8%. At the very least, try to hold on until you reach the age at which you can receive your full Social Security benefit. For me, that was age 66. And if you work beyond that age and can manage without Social Security, your benefit will continue to rise each year until you reach age 70. Many advisors think it is smarter to tap into an IRA or other savings rather than take Social Security before you absolutely have to, because it's hard to beat a 7 to 8% guaranteed investment return. The numbers really do tell the story. A typical senior who would receive $1,350 a month from Social Security at age 62 would see that check grow to $2,376 a month if they delayed taking the benefit until age 70. Work longer, or at least work part-time. In an ideal world, we'd all be able to sock away a ton of money to set us up to retire when we want to. But reality works differently. If you'd asked me when I started self-employment whether I'd still be at it late into my 60s, I would have said no, definitely not. Yet here I am, working on a greatly reduced schedule and with only a couple clients, but still working nonetheless. The best way to look at this is to consider that one of the beautiful things about self-employment is that no one is going to put you out to pasture until you want to go. As long as you can and want to work, and can find clients to pay you, you can continue to earn money as long as you wish. As your own boss, you have a great ability to bring in income that allows you to either avoid dipping into your retirement savings or to delay taking Social Security to maximize your benefit. And of course, you can work as little or as much as you like, something that is rarely possible if you had an employer. Plus, what I've found so far is that keeping active with work has dividends of its own. It keeps me in touch with clients and colleagues who I enjoy, and it provides intellectual stimulation, which is never a bad thing as you age. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. Who needs to save up for retirement? Not me. I will make enough money in my later years, and I will work into my 70s, and thus be able to live well for the rest of my life. Ambitions and dreams are good, but sometimes a reality check is what is really needed. Howie Green. Retirement? What's that? I do what I love, and even if I were retired, I would still be working at what I do. So yeah, I'll be working till they get the shovels. I had a retirement plan IRA and a stock portfolio and all those things one is supposed to have, and was well on my way to a financially comfortable old age. Then the stock market crash and recession of 2000 to 2001 happened, and then 2008 happened, and yeah, I'll just keep working, thanks. Chapter 19. The Taxman Cometh. No book on how to succeed at self-employment would be complete without a chapter about the tax-related challenges posed by being self-employed. Tax-wise, life changes dramatically when you become your own boss. First, there is the agony of having to make quarterly estimated tax payments. And then there is the dreaded self-employment tax, which kills me every year. The quarterly payments can be challenging. Instead of your employer withholding taxes from each paycheck, you are now responsible for estimating what your income will be for the year and how much tax you will owe, including Social Security and Medicare taxes. Then you have to make quarterly payments toward that tax on April 15, June 15, September 15, and January 15. If you live in a state with a state income tax, you also have to make quarterly estimated payments for that. Sounds simple enough, until you actually have to do it. I don't know about all businesses, but in my line of work, it is difficult to know with any degree of certainty on April 15, June 15, or even September 15, what my income may be for the year. Fluctuations can be significant from year to year, and if the year starts off slowly, or expenses are up for some reason, coming up with the scratch to make that first estimated quarterly payment on April 15, as well as pay anything you still might owe on your taxes from the prior year on that same date, can be rough. If you don't pay in enough through your estimated payments, fines and interest will be charged. Making your quarterly payments and getting them in the right amounts is a challenge that many self-employed people fail to master, and thus, they end up in trouble with the IRS. If you're not a disciplined person when it comes to financial matters, consider this carefully before jumping into self-employment. The real killer. The self-employment tax comes as a serious shock to people who haven't thought through the full financial implications of being out on their own without an employer. Because no employer is paying half of your Social Security and Medicare taxes, you must pay the entire amount. I know. Gasp. Each year when I look at my tax return, it is this figure, the self-employment tax, that causes me to groan, not the actual income tax figure. Think about that the next time you look at your pay stub. Check out the FICA number and double it. Does that make you panic a little, knowing that if you were self-employed, this would be the amount you'd pay? Now you know how those of us who are self-employed feel each year at tax time, and how you'll feel if you pursue self-employment. Coping strategies. When starting out, find a tax pro skilled at working with the self-employed. When I was working for someone else, I always did my own taxes because it was a relatively simple matter. But all that changed when I became self-employed. I quickly found that hiring a tax professional who was well informed on allowable deductions, tax law changes, and similar matters was critical to my peace of mind and well worth the expense. I recommend you do the same for at least the first few years of self-employment. Yes, excellent tax preparation software is available that will help you do a good job on your taxes. I've used it for the past 10 years after switching to it from the tax pro who formerly did my taxes. But I still recommend that for the first year or two of self-employment, you consider working with a professional rather than with a computer program. The tax software has a definite learning curve, and that curve will be less steep if you have as a guide your previous year's tax return that was prepared by a tax professional. Also, meeting with a tax professional as soon as you set up your business will help you get informed about allowable deductions and other things you should be tracking throughout the year. Learn as much as you can from this person before tackling the software on your own. When you do work with a professional, make sure to get a copy of your tax return for your records. I took this as a given, but it turns out that according to tax preparers, some people do not do this. This indicates to me that they don't realize the value of being able to compare this year's return to last year's return. It also indicates they are being far too trusting and perhaps not thoroughly reviewing the tax return before signing it. When I used a tax professional, I found errors more than once that I needed to point out and have fixed before filing the return. So make sure you not only thoroughly review and understand every line of your return, but that you also get a copy from your tax pro so that you can have it on file. Think of it as a report card on how well your business is doing. By having copies to compare year to year, you can spot places where you can do a better job in the coming year. Take record keeping seriously. Do not be that person who throws receipts and paid invoices into a shoebox and then tries to make sense of it all on April 14. Now that you're making estimated quarterly tax payments, you need to keep on top of your bookkeeping so that you have a solid idea of what those payments should be. The last thing you want to do is guess what these payments should be. If you send in too little money, it can lead to a penalty from the IRS. On the other hand, if you send in too much money, You're in effect lending the IRS your hard-earned cash, and interest-free to boot. Nobody wants to do that. Also, you need to track expenses closely to make sure you get all the deductions you deserve. If you're not used to saving receipts, this may be a challenge at first, but it will soon become second nature. Develop a method of tracking income and expenses that works for you. Whether you decide to do this on paper or with an accounting software program, keeping this information up to date will help you determine your estimated quarterly tax payments with reasonable accuracy. The Small Business Development Center at your nearby community college almost certainly offers courses or workshops in QuickBooks accounting software. I realize that financial record keeping is an anathema to some people. As a words person, I'm certainly not fond of typing numbers into a computer program, which is why I am so grateful that my husband does my bookkeeping for me. Perhaps you can work out a similar arrangement with your spouse or significant other. If you don't have such help available, then grit your teeth and just do it. Or, if your budget allows, pay a bookkeeper. Not keeping on top of your numbers not only risks encountering extreme stress when you finally do have to buckle down to the task of doing your taxes, but also means, as I've said, you could be in trouble with the IRS if you have just guesstimated your quarterly tax payments wrong and have underpaid. IRS penalties add up fast, and they are relentless about collecting. Don't get carried away with deductions. The IRS requires that business deductions be ordinary and necessary for the conduct of your business. Ordinary means an expense is common and accepted in your field of business. Necessary means an expense is helpful and appropriate for your business. Expenses also have to be reasonable, meaning it is unwise to spend lavishly on anything just because you think it can be deducted. The IRS has guidelines for how much would be a reasonable amount for someone in your line of work and earning your income to deduct for special expense categories. You can get in big trouble, as in called in for an audit, by straying beyond the ordinary, necessary, and reasonable. It may be tempting when you first start out to buy the deluxe model of everything on the grounds that it will be deductible. But this can also wreak havoc with your cash flow when the bills flow in for those deluxe models. Playing off current outlays against tax deductions that will come at months down the road isn't always a good strategy. Do learn tax-saving strategies. You can find plenty of advice on tax-saving strategies online. Just make sure you rely on accredited sources. The IRS website is full of great information, whereas some guy you never heard of, who writes a blog, may or may not know what he's talking about. One tax-saving strategy that has always served me well is to take an inventory of all my office supplies in early December and then head off to the office supply store to buy what I am going to need in the next 6 months before the end of the month. This way, I can deduct this expense on my tax return for the year just ending. I also have planned big purchases like new computers or laptops for late in the year to enable me to get the benefit of the deduction sooner rather than later. Another key tax-saving area to get up to speed on is retirement plans, as discussed in the previous chapter. Whatever retirement plans you put in place, do develop the discipline to contribute to them monthly rather than waiting until the deadline to dump in your cash. Not only is this a wise strategy for retirement savings, but it is also a wise investing strategy to spread your investments out over the course of the year, rather than in one lump sum. This is called dollar cost averaging, and means you end up paying less per share over the course of a year than if you made an investment all at once. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. Not staying on top of bookkeeping and tax matters can be a real danger for many, including myself. This is just boring and not productive at all. I am always way behind with my accounting and tax overviews. It works out in the end, but maybe it would be better to pay your way out of this by hiring professional help in order to eliminate such a stress factor. Carol Savage. I have never had difficulty with estimated tax payments. I do let our accountant review my business worksheet and make a recommendation for what I should pay in quarterly payments. Yes, it costs a small sum, but for the most part, it has worked out and I rarely had to pay in more. Barbara Rodriguez. Ah yes, the tax man, the bane of my existence. The only thing worse than a bad accountant is a bad lawyer. A tax error can be fixed, whereas a legal error can be fatal. During the course of my business, I have had 4 accountants. I used to think an accountant is an accountant is an accountant. A good accountant can make you or break you. At the beginning, when you're making little to no money, it's easy to dismiss the importance of an accountant. Later, as revenues start to increase and you seem to be making less and less because your accountant isn't monitoring your quarterly earnings, you either change accountants or end up paying a big chunk of money at the end of the year, which you may not have readily available. I love my current accountant. He has found ways to save me lots of money, decrease my tax burden, advise me on putting money into a 401k to lessen the tax bite, and change the structure of my business when necessary. For example, at the beginning, I was a sole proprietor. Then I became a limited liability corporation, and now, an S-corp. All these structures have tax advantages or disadvantages depending on your particular situation. Find an accountant you can trust, and life will be easier. Howie Green. Don't even try to deal with this stuff on your own. Again, get a good accountant, talk to them every day, and never let him or her go. After my dear, dear, lovely, wonderful accountant retired, I found another good one. My cousin in San Diego. Location doesn't matter. Chapter 20. Deadbeat Clients. Having to chase clients for money is no fun. In fact, it's probably the least fun thing you'll ever do when you're self-employed. It can be an enervating, depressing, and maddening exercise. And it can be downright scary if the amount of money someone owes you is significant enough to put your business in peril. On this front, I have been amazingly lucky in my years of self-employment, because my total financial loss from clients who ultimately never paid for services rendered is under $2,000. Knock on wood that this continues. But that doesn't mean I haven't spent nights awake worrying how much longer I would have to fret about whether this or that client would, in the end, pay what was owed. I spent months dunning a client in 2009. Promise after promise was broken. I wasn't asking them to pay the few $1,000s they owed all at once, since I knew the recession had knocked their real estate-related business for a loop. But I did expect them to live up to their promise of paying a small installment each month. But even this proved to be too much for them. Finally, they had a sudden influx of cash and paid the entire remaining amount off in one fell swoop. Our next conversation dealt with the fact that they were going to have to find a new public relations consultant, since I was unwilling to work with them again unless they paid 100% in advance. They took it well, and, in fact, did pay in full in advance for a project soon after. Lesson learned all the way around. The squeaky wheel does get oiled. I credit my relatively low losses over nearly 3 decades of business to the fact that I apply the squeaky wheel adage early and often when a client's bill goes overdue. My bills are supposed to be paid within 30 days. If I don't have a check in hand by day 30, I email the client on day 31. If that doesn't produce an instant explanation, I follow up with a phone call. I do not give up, and I don't hesitate to be that irritatingly squeaky wheel. A slow-paying client is guaranteed to hear from me every week. I've found that such persistence is what is required to get invoices paid. I have friends who will let weeks, or even months, go by before they inquire about an overdue invoice. This is foolish. As the time expands between when you delivered your services and when you speak up and demand what you are owed, the odds increase that you won't get paid. Einstein didn't come up with that formula, but I am positive it is true based on having observed the losses suffered by colleagues who were loath to do their collections work in a timely fashion. So, bottom line, If you're the type of person who has a hard time asking for what you deserve, for example, prompt payment for your product or services, then you may have a rocky road if you go the self-employment route. If this is you, a course in assertiveness may be in order, because I guarantee you that sooner or later you will have to chase a client for money. It happens to everyone. Coping strategies. Become friends with the person who actually cuts the checks. I've wrested many a payment out of a late payer by building a good relationship with their accounts payable person. I try to identify this person even before things go haywire, so that I don't have to build this relationship after a bill is late. Consider calling this person after you submit your first invoice. You can inquire as to whether there was any additional information they needed on the invoice. This positions you as someone who wants to be helpful to them, which they will appreciate. Getting on a first-name basis with the accounts payable person will pay dividends down the line. This individual can either make your life miserable or make it a breeze. Never forget this. Also, never get pushy with this person or, worse yet, yell at them. It's not their fault that your client is running short on funds, and a spoonful of sugar will get you much farther than a loud voice will. If the company is in financial troubles or having a cash shortage, the accounts payable person will probably have lots of people being nasty to them. Don't be that person. Instead, be the person who is nice and understanding, but also persistent. Do not be afraid to play the "I'm not the phone company" card. I have never hesitated to remind an accounts payable person that I am a solopreneur trying to survive out here on my own, instead of a huge, faceless corporation with lots of financial resources. Usually, you don't have to say too much in this vein to get the message across and have your invoice move to the top of the pile. Seriously, it works, especially if you've laid the groundwork by building a relationship with the accounts payable person. Keep close track of your invoice due dates. The money end of business is often the least attractive part for many people, especially those of us in creative fields. We hate doing billing. We hate record keeping, and we hate chasing money. Fine, hate it all you like, but do it anyway if you want to stay in business. You should always know who owes you money, how much they owe, and when it is due. Find resources that will help you be well organized and systematic. There are plenty of tools available to assist you in this. For example, a few years ago I started using PayPal to send invoices to my smaller clients, a handful of people for whom I do small editing jobs. Yes, PayPal does take a small cut of the money, but what I've found is that I get my money really fast by using their service because these clients find it quick and easy to pay their small bills, usually no more than a few $100s, through PayPal. My record time between sending out such an invoice and receiving payment was about 15 minutes. Before I started using PayPal for these clients, I often had to waste time chasing down the money. These people are mostly also self-employed people whose systems weren't the best, and so my invoice would shuffle around on their desks, not being paid. That is not the case now, and if someone is a little late, PayPal has a very convenient system that takes just a click of the mouse to send off a friendly reminder. Send invoices electronically. I hesitated doing this at first, fearing it might not seem professional as an invoice printed on my nice letterhead. But once I did begin to send my invoices via email, I found that they got paid faster. You may find that a small minority of clients will still want you to send them a paper copy of your invoice. For such people, I send both electronically and via snail mail, noting on the electronic invoice that a hard copy is being mailed. See if offering a discount for early payment makes a difference with slow payers. I've never done this myself, but I do know that small businesses have found it worth their while to offer a small discount of up to 3% for early payment. Consider trying this particularly with large invoices that will decimate your available cash if they aren't paid promptly. Ask for deposits. I have had a long policy that each new client has to pay a deposit until I have enough experience with them to know that they are going to pay their bills promptly. Since I get a huge percentage of my new clients as referrals from existing or former clients, I have always felt a certain amount of protection built in because people usually aren't going to refer someone they know to be a deadbeat. However, no matter how good the source of the referral is, I still always ask for a deposit, usually 20 to 30%. This way, if the new client turns out to have a challenge in paying on time, at least you've got some money up front. Don't be afraid to fire a habitually late-paying client. I know this is easier said than done, especially if you're just getting started and are trying to build your business. But trust me and all my friends and colleagues who have gone through something like this, firing a lousy client almost always pays off. And a client who you have to chase for money is definitely a lousy client. It's the old, when one door closes, another door opens thing. More often than not, the time you save and the negative energy you avoid by not having to dun someone constantly will mean you have more time to find a good client to replace the bad one. Don't work for people who disrespect you by not paying their bills on time. This is not to say that a good client might not need some leeway once or twice. If the person has a reasonable explanation for being late, and it has not happened before, of course you cut them some slack. But if this goes on month after month, that's a serious red flag that perhaps this person's business is in trouble, and you might be the one holding the empty bag in the end. Help avoid collection problems in the first place by researching potential new clients. As I've mentioned, one of the reasons I think I've been burned so few times with clients who have not paid is that probably 80% of my business has come through referrals from either existing clients or close colleagues. In general, you can be fairly certain that these people aren't going to refer anyone about whom they have doubts regarding their ability to pay. But for those potential clients who come your way from other sources, your website, through meeting them at a network meeting and the like, you should definitely do as much research as you can before signing on with them. For example, check the Better Business Bureau website to see if they have complaints about them. If a business is shoddy in one aspect of their work, such as customer service, you can bet that they might be sloppy in another aspect, such as paying their vendors. Also, check with people in your business network to see if anyone knows anything about how the business treats its vendors. If anything sounds questionable, back away. It's easier, and better, to find another prospect than it is to tie yourself to a company that is going to make you beg for the money you are owed. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. I have not really experienced bad clients who did not pay their bills, but I have had my share of clients who took a very long time to pay. I have learned that even though big companies start out with a 60 to 90 days payment term, you can bring this down to something more acceptable. Not everything is written in stone, not even at these big companies. State your case and ask for fairness. It sometimes helps. Barbara Rodriguez. I've never really had to worry about deadbeat clients, since most of my clients are government agencies. We also work with large hospitals, health clinics, and the like. More small businesses should consider working with the government. The government buys just about any product or service. Don't let the RFPs or the bureaucratic red tape scare you. Once you establish yourself, there's a lot of money to be made, and they don't become deadbeat because you have an official contract with them spelling out the payment terms. Once you get a contract with one state, it's easy to piggyback on that to procure a contract in another state. You need to show some track record. You also need to know the exact person to call if payment on invoices start lagging. Many people are scared to work with the government, but I find them to be very reliable customers as long as you cross your I's and dot your T's and stay competitive. State contracts offer stability and security because they usually go for a certain term, like 3 to 5 years. The state can only work with vendors who have been approved, and if applicable, You can get certified as a minority or woman-owned business, which is beneficial, since the state has to dedicate a percentage of their contracting out to minority or woman-owned businesses. Howie Green. I always worked with a collection agency, and if clients don't pay their bills, then I don't work for them anymore. Simple as that. They wouldn't accept non-payment from their clients, and why should I? This is business, so you have to make sure both you and your client have the same payment expectations and keep to those expectations. 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, whatever the payment schedule is. Make sure everyone is clear about it. And the best advice I ever got was from my accountant, who said, if your clients aren't complaining about how much you charge, then you're not charging enough. Chapter 21. Surviving Cash Flow Ebbs. Earlier, I talked about the problem of having big fluctuations in your workload. An obvious corollary of a downswing in your workload is an ensuing drop in your income. Developing strategies for surviving cash flow ebbs means the difference between staying in business for yourself and needing to hunt for a gig with a regular paycheck. In real estate, everyone knows the most important thing is location, location, location. It didn't take me long to realize when I started my business that cash flow, cash flow, cash flow rules the life of the self-employed. Having a steady, adequate influx of money to pay the bills is essential. This is especially true if you're single, and there is no one else around to serve as your financial backstop if your income suddenly takes a dive. Aside from the practical worries of having bills that need to be paid, a slowdown in your income may affect your mental capacity to focus on your work, causing your self-confidence and optimism about your future to plummet. This is especially true if you're in the early days of self-employment and haven't been down this road before. It is easy to panic and be filled with self-doubt about the career choice you've made. Avoid feeling nostalgic. You may find yourself nostalgic for that former job and its reliable paycheck. You might polish up your resume and spend time perusing online job sites. This is not the route out, however. Do not beat yourself up over the choice you've made to try self-employment, and do not lose faith in your ability to make it on your own. Instead, stay focused on the two tasks at hand. 1. Providing excellent service for your clients, and 2. Undertaking activities that will bring in new business. In my experience, if you're doing these two things, something will turn up to turn your finances around. I know that following this advice takes an act of faith, but I urge you to stick with it. Once you've been through a couple slowdowns in your cash flow, you'll gain confidence in your ability to turn things around. I barely blinked when I lost my biggest client when the Great Recession hit in late 2007, because I had been there, done that, in the 2 previous recessions I'd survived. After nearly 2 decades of self-employment, I was confident I could go out and find someone else who needed my services. As it turned out, only a month later, I didn't find a new client. He found me all the way from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean via my website, and he's still my client all these years later. Learning to manage your cash flow is an essential skill. As I've mentioned before, the wise thing is to create a rainy day fund, setting aside money when your business is really rocking to help during the inevitable lulls. Despite being a total bust at assembling a rainy day fund, I have managed to master the cash flow management strategies below, which have kept me out of trouble and will help you too. Coping strategies. Get deposits. Getting part of your money up front is always a wise idea and definitely helps with cash flow crunches. I only require new clients to pay deposits, but the fact is that the time when you're out beating the new business's bushes the hardest is during cash flow lulls. So it's also when you're likely to have new clients from which to request deposits. Don't hesitate to use this strategy. It is common business practice, and if a would-be client balks at it, it is a signal that perhaps you'll have a hard time getting your money once you have done the work. I also know people who require deposits from ongoing clients. In general, however, I think it's difficult to switch strategies once a relationship has already begun. If you suddenly start asking for deposits on every project, this may give the impression you're in financial trouble. In general, people don't like doing business with vendors who are on the financial ropes because they wonder if you'll be around long enough to finish the job. I make one exception to this. If you've learned from painful experience that a client tends to be a slow payer, by all means, start asking for deposits. Instead of being left waiting for all of your money at the end of a project, at least you'll already have collected part of it. Have retainer clients. This doesn't work in every business, but if you're a consultant like me, it definitely helps to have some clients on retainer. Terms can vary, but in most cases, it means you get paid at the start of the month for work that will be done in that month. This gives you predictability in your income, at least as long as the retainer agreement continues. In exchange for paying up front each month, I give clients a small discount on my hourly rate, usually 10%. But again, not everybody does it. Some people charge their normal rate for retainers. Don't be afraid to be a nag. Sometimes cash flow problems are caused not by a slow work period, but by a client who is slow to pay. As I discussed in the last chapter, being diligent about reminding clients when bills are overdue is essential. Many times I've had friends complain that one of their clients hasn't paid, sometimes for months. When I ask what they've done about it, the answer has sometimes been, nothing. Too many freelancers are so afraid of roughing a client's feathers that they hesitate to implement good collection practices. This is madness. You did the work. You deserve to be paid, and paid on time. If you don't have the backbone to ask for the money you are owed, self-employment almost certainly is not for you. Don't hesitate to drop a client who is constantly late with payments. Almost any client can sometimes lose your bill in the clutter on their desk, or go off on vacation without remembering that your payment is due. But if a client is constantly late paying and you have to constantly nag to get what is due you, this probably signals that the client is in financial trouble and may be on their way out of business. You don't want to be among the unpaid creditors when they shut their doors. So bid them a gracious goodbye and find a client without such problems. It should go without saying that you wait to say adieu until after you've collected what is currently due, and never keep doing additional work for someone who is seriously overdue on their payment to you. I also believe that having to deal with the negativity of repeatedly having to dun a client is something you're better off without. It is energy sapping to have to gear yourself up for yet another phone conversation in which you ask to be paid, only to be given more excuses and promises that more than likely are quickly broken. You'll feel so much better when you've put such a client in your rearview mirror that you'll have plenty of positive energy to go out and find a client to replace the late payer. Do without the convenience of automatic bill payments. Sure, having your mortgage, credit card, utility bills, and other payments automatically deducted from your checking account each month is hugely convenient. But when you're self-employed and experience a cash flow crisis, those automatic payments can lead to disaster. You need to be aware of your bank balance at all times and be able to decide whom to pay when based on your estimates of when clients will pay what they owe you. Doing without the automatic payments is a pain, I know, but you need to retain as much financial flexibility as possible. Don't keep it a secret if you need more business. The tendency among many self-employed people who hit a financial slump is to hide this development from colleagues who are in a position to help. The desire to have people think you're highly successful is natural, and certainly you don't want to go around with a gloomy face complaining about how poor you are. However, a middle ground exists between giving the impression that you are doing so well that you couldn't possibly take on a new client and having people worry that you might go out of business any day now. Don't let your ego keep you from reaching out to friends. There is no shame in letting a select group of people know that you could use more business. I've often found that a quiet word to one of my close collaborators that my schedule isn't as full as I'd like it to be has produced a timely referral or a subcontracting opportunity that makes all the difference. I have also been prompted to similarly send business toward colleagues when they have shared with me that their business was in a bit of a slow spot. Other voices. Stefan Lindegard. I know all about cash flow ebbs, but somehow it seems as if it just works out. You might be a bit late on some payments, but you get through it, once again. You kind of get a strong stomach when you have been through this over and over again. I think most other people with regular jobs would be running away like crazy if they did not know if they could pay the bills 2 months ahead. Of course, this also means that one of the things I really strive for as a lifestyle entrepreneur is to get to the point where I don't have to worry about this. You get used to it, but the cash flow ebbs can still bring you down. Barbara Rodriguez. At the beginning, I would deposit payments once a week. I soon learned that if I deposited payments as they came in, sometimes daily, my cash flow improved and I felt much better psychologically. After we could show some track record of success, I applied for a line of credit. I have never had to use it, but it gave me a sense of security. Early on, I also felt shy about collections. I soon, out of necessity, overcame my shyness and found that most of the time, the invoice has been sitting forgotten on someone's desk and they apologize profusely and send the payment. So I started staying right on top of due dates and being proactive about collections. I also now call the accounts payable departments to request EFT payments if possible. This lowers the possibility that the invoice will fall into a black hole on someone's desk. The invoice should go to the right person to begin with, or maybe consider CCing the accounts payable person. Howie Green. I had a great accountant who, as part of his very reasonably priced service, monitored my account and told me when to pay bills and what bills to pay. If it were up to me, it would have been a mess. Get a good accountant,